Yeah, Klaus said 5 minutes early. I'm pretty sure that's a lie.
From the wood gallery. Hey,
I know, right?
what's going on?
I like when parents are in my family.
I should. Yeah, I feel like I'm sorry. I can't answer that.
Oh my gosh.
We need this for.
Thank you so much.
Wow, that reminded me of.
I was holding off at like 9%.
What?
Like, no, I can make
It's
it
always
work.
like the most terrifying, like,
Yeah, well, if I seemed a little distracted when we were talking, it was because I was like, do I need to run home right now? How much time do I have? That makes much more sense to me now. We have a minute to go. Yeah.
what's that?
Oh, I could tell you all this before we start. One of the liquor licenses, Kismet did not give me the right kind of license for an outdoor consumption permit. Time is tight. So I'm hoping that if folks sign the back of it, that it might work. So one of the sign here's is going to the back, like a blank back sheet of paper. So just sign it, we'll see what happens.
Roll with it.
They might go with it. I think there's about a 50-50
Interesting.
chance.
Okay.
Because otherwise, we'll just have to scramble and get it in before the end of the month.
Okay, well, it is 6:30, so we're going to get started. Okay, so the first thing is to review and approve the agenda, and I don't think we have any adjustments to be made, unless anyone has some suggestions. Okay, so without objection, we'll consider the agenda approved. So general business and appearances. This is an opportunity for any member of the public to come address the council on some topic that is otherwise not on our agenda. And if you have something to say, if you would say your name, where you're from, and try to keep your comments to 2 minutes or less, and that is true for, generally speaking, all of the comments on any regular business item, if possible. Okay, seeing no one hop up. We're going to move on. So the consideration of the consent agenda. Is there a motion regarding the consent agenda? Oh, Lauren?
There were two things I saw. In the March 13th minutes, it still had Donna as the alternate for the Central Vermont Solid Waste Management District, so I think that should be changed. It was listed correctly in the first part, but then when we were doing it for Ellen's appointment, it said Donna was the alternate. So
Why don't we pull those then, because I actually didn't take those, but I other
That's
things I didn't
Sheila.
look really close
Hey,
at.
John, can you speak into your mic?
Can you fire me off an email?
Absolutely.
With the correction, and we can yank them from now, and I'll just tweak that and put them on next time.
All right, so do you remember which minutes those were? There were two.
Yeah, it was from the March 13th meeting.
Shall we just pull that one off then?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll fix it for next time.
Okay.
I mean, that's a substantive change.
Yeah.
It seems like, I guess. I mean, I could just change it.
We just move to amend it right now.
Move to amend it right now.
Sure.
After they do.
It's changed in one place and not the other,
Right.
so I consider it like a typo. but you
Well,
just
that,
missed
yeah, that's just a technical
replacement.
error.
Okay.
I can correct technical errors. That's
Okay.
fine.
Change. Is there otherwise a motion regarding the consent agenda?
Move the consent agenda.
Second.
And just to clarify, that's with this.
With the amendment, yeah.
adjustment, okay. Further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great, thank you. Okay, so the review of the ordinances. So this, the attachment I know was very long, but the intent here was not to dive into the substance of the ordinances or the amendments to the ordinances at this point, but just to talk through what our plan was going to be to take this up, because it is a lot to read through. Do you want to comment
Sure.
on this?
And Jamie's here, who kind of spearheaded organizing all of this. So she's been shepherding everything. So you may have, if you have questions, she can help with that. But basically, as you know, one of our goals last year was to go through all the ordinances and get them updated and bring them up to speed. And we finally got most of the way there. I think there's probably a few that will come straggling in. And we really wanted to know how you wanted to approach those. Our suggestion, if this is helpful, is that we do them one chapter at a time at a meeting. So we would do like, because some of them the chapters are pretty quick. They're not that difficult. So we might do chapter 1, first reading at the next meeting, and then after that would be chapter 1, second reading, and first reading of chapter 2, and just work our way through. And if we get hung up on a chapter, then obviously we'll stay with that till we're done with it. But just at each meeting, just try to work our way through one chapter. Some of them are more substantive than others, but really the lion's share of them are just cleanup. So we thought that would just be kind of a steady piece of our work plan all year.
Any comments about that plan?
Or you could just approve them all tonight. Except you can't. We didn't warn it as a hearing. So.
I'm seeing general, okay, lots of nods, but Jack?
I think that's fine. I think it's good. I was thinking some way to space it out over time, whether it's a chapter at a time or something bigger chunks than that, but either way, much better that people know. If people are at home or paying attention to particular sections, they don't have to come in and sit through a whole thing.
Right. And some of the chapters will go super quickly, and others, will be longer.
So would you or Jamie then arrange it in groupings and let us know
Yeah.
which
Well,
ones we're
probably-
going to
yeah.
do when? That'd be
And
great.
then we'll put it on the advance agendas so you can see the.
There's
layout.
a-
Right. That's what our plan was.
Well,
to
but-
start with one and go
Yep.
through.
But if some don't have very many, you might group them in a larger grouping, that's all.
Never know what will generate conversation.
Great. I don't know that we need a motion on that, but people are generally okay with this idea to do a chapter. Yeah, go ahead, Connor.
Yeah, not just separate, but somewhat connected. I noticed we haven't reviewed the personnel manual since 2007. So we have a few things like the Affordable Care Act have come in, I noticed like non-classified employees are like required to live in Montpelier. I don't think that's the case. So I think like
Yeah,
we could have some tweaks to that as well, maybe at some point.
That's in the works. We've got.
Okay, yeah.
That's on. That'll be in this year's. It's in the pipeline.
Cool.
Okay. All right, so we're going to move on from that. So we're on to the Main and Berry Street scoping study, which I'm really excited to talk about. So I know we have some consultants and our own staff, so welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. You all have a presentation, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to vacate
Okay.
this spot.
while we're waiting for this to come up, I just remind everyone to use the mics, get as close. Okay.
Are these?
Those are the, yep.
I'll try the best I can. Kind of overcoming a cold here.
There we go. Right.
So we're here this evening with Lucy Gibson and Sophie Sauve from Du Bois and King. They have a presentation for us to take us through the Main and Berry scoping study, where we've been, where we are, and what our next steps are. We are not here tonight looking for final approval. This is an opportunity for us to get you up to speed and also take any comments or questions you have so we can then go back and make any revisions and prepare the document, the draft study for final approval. Lucy will take you through the next steps that we have, that'll happen between now and the next time we see this. I just wanted to quickly rewind the clock back here. I know there's been a lot of turnover on the council since the Bike and Ped Master Plan was approved. And really this is a part of that plan. So that plan provided this connectivity network throughout the city. Kind of showed where bicycle facilities should be, what they should be, and there was this kind of blank space in the middle of it, which included this corridor. And it kind of said we needed to look at this on its own. There's so many impacts here. We'd like to look at it in the context of the master plan, but have its own study. And so that's why we're here this evening, is to fill in that blank within the Montpelier motion plan. The other thing I wanted to make a point about is this is a scoping study. There currently is no funding in place to implement any of this. There are no permits in place. There are no traffic or parking ordinances in place that would back any of these changes up currently. Those are steps along the way after we've finalized our vision. And those are steps that you will be included in as well as different departments at the state level. So I think without any further ado, Lucy.
Great, thanks. Well, thanks for making time for this. We really enjoyed working with Corey and the rest of the team and the city. And also give thanks to an advisory committee who met a number of times and perhaps may have one more meeting. And Donna was the city council representative, and a lot of members from other organizations and committees in town. And we had great feedback from the staff, and we had the teams, more people than listed at Du Bois and King, but our core team was myself, Sophie, and Julia, who both Julie and Sophie live in Montpelier, so we're also really lucky to have in-depth local knowledge. And here is the timeline that we did the study over. It was intended to be more about a 12-month, but the project, as you'll see as we go through, it gets quite complicated. We took a little extra time as we went through to consult with city departments and various committees over the course of the study. And so this just gives a timeline, but we had several project steering committee, or maybe their advisory committee meetings. We met with MTIC, the Montpelier Transportation Infrastructure Committee, and then we also had a meeting with all the city managers of different city departments. And these were all really helpful, and hopefully we brought all that input, but we certainly, this is a draft and we want to get more input from you all tonight and any further direction that we might need. And so what I'm planning for this evening, because I know you don't want to spend all evening on it, I'll go through a lot of the background parts of the study fairly quickly, but just so you have an idea of all the areas we covered, and then focus probably a little more detail on what were the recommendations coming out of the study at this point that we really, the main focus for your input, of course. So we did, in the scoping study, we really did reach out several different ways to get public input on some of the issues and concerns that people had in the study area, which again was Main Street and Berry Street. And we did an online map where people could click online at their convenience and give comments and locate places of concern. And in addition, we had town meeting day. We had paper maps where people could put red dots for concerns and green dots for things they like and make notes. So we have a lot of good information from what people are thinking and experiencing in downtown, because, you know, we look at it from a professional design standpoint, but it's really the users have the best experience that help us understand the issues. So from this map, it's pretty clear that the biggest red spot is the intersection of Main Street and Berry Street. So that was clearly a number one. And then a few other hot spots. The top hot spots I listed off here, and clearly number one was Main Street and Berry Street. And probably most of these comments in general were more from the pedestrian perspective than the bicycle perspective, because there's obviously a lot more people walking through downtown than biking. And then also comments about people driving too, that felt unsafe or difficult to drive even. So we have comments from all different modes, but some of the main themes was that at Berry and Main Street, some type of traffic control is needed, and it could be a roundabout or traffic signal. And then crossing Main Street at Berry Street is a major crossing, but it feels very unsafe. It's wide, and there's so much chaotic kind of traffic movement that pedestrians don't feel confident that the drivers see them and are going to react accordingly. So it's not a comfortable place to travel through by any mode of transportation. Another really hot spot was just Berry Street itself. And at the time we were doing this, it was around February and town meeting day, and I think there were big snowbanks, and people really talked about how narrow it is with parking on both sides, and people get their mirrors taken off, or it feels very unsafe to open your door to get out of the car, and that kind of thing. So there were suggestions of get rid of one lane of parking, or make it one-way street. You know, different ideas were also mentioned. A third hotspot was the crossing at Langdon Street, and people had observations both from a driver's perspective and a pedestrian crossing perspective that because it's during congested times, pedestrians aren't sure that drivers are going to stop for them because they've just gotten through a State and Main intersection, and drivers feel like if they stop, they'll get rear-ended by anxious cars getting through. So there's a lot of challenges in moving through this crossing as well, and both drivers and pedestrians have concerns. And then another concern is with during peak hour when there's a queues of traffic standing there, a pedestrian trying to cross sort of slips through the cars and is sort of hidden by the waiting cars. So there's some safety issues there as well. The State and Main intersection, there were a lot of different comments, but not necessarily all bad. They were kind of mixed. And then the School and Main Street intersection was another spot where pedestrians, especially crossing at that location, feel like it's very wide. Cars can get going a little bit fast as they're trying to buzz out of town, and that it's hard to get onto Main Street from the side street. And a lot of suggestions for always stop, like Spring and Elm. So that was some of the feedback that we got that was very helpful. And then we also heard some and really was informed by the Montpelier motion plan of there's some challenges riding a bike in Montpelier as well. While you have the bike paths are great, but riding through the streets in the study area, again, was focusing on Main and Berry, there aren't bike lanes, there's a fairly heavy traffic, so people riding might feel exposed if they're not the real confident riders. And then you see a lot of people riding on sidewalks, and that's, while it may feel safer than riding the street, it actually can be quite dangerous because every time there's a driveway, the car may not see the cyclist, especially when they're hidden by parked cars from the view of the driver. So it's a sign that the streets aren't making people comfortable to ride, and instead they're choosing another place that's not very safe to ride. And some of the other thinking about what kind of bicycle infrastructure should be provided for in this central part of town. And the map on the left shows the infrastructure that's currently or planned. There are different shades of colors, but they kind of, you can get a sense that there's a network, but it's sort of missing a hole in the middle. The graph on the right is we have limited data on how many people ride on what streets, but we do get some data from online bike apps that people use while they're riding their bike. So it gives you an idea of the places people want to ride are very much the same as they want to drive. And, you know, people want to make the connection between the paths and some of the other bike lanes in other parts of town. So again, these are the areas where infrastructure's not there, but a lot of potential demand is there. And another thing that we want to think about when we're thinking about bicycle infrastructure is who are we designing the infrastructure for? Because bicyclists vary widely in their ability, and on the right side of that chart you have the kind of people that have no trouble riding now on the streets. They don't mind riding in traffic, they're confident. And then the next group, the 7%, are fairly confident riders. They're probably likely to feel comfortable riding on Montpelier streets. But then there's a lot of people that, and these percentages are average around surveys that are done around the country, so not Montpelier specific, but no reason to think it's different. There's a big group of people that would like to ride a bike more. They are interested in riding, but they're not comfortable on what we call high stress routes, where there's a lot of traffic and no designated lanes or space for them. So really, to get more people riding in Vermont, which is the vision put out in the master plan, we really want to think about getting those people comfortable riding on the streets or pathways. And then we looked at a lot of different types of infrastructure. This is just a range where, from on the left side are sharrows, which is just nothing more than marking a bike symbol on the road, telling traffic they can expect bikes, and showing bikes that they need to kind of ride in the lane because there's not a separate lane. And then there's various types of bike lanes with more and more protection as you go to the right on the graphic. I won't go into detail, but to the far right is a totally protected path like what you have in the Central Vermont path, or protected bike lanes that are really physically separated from traffic. And that's what we call lower stress facility, where a person riding feels a lot less stress and doesn't have to be sharing the traffic. So those are the kind of facilities we want to try to look at in connecting the Central Vermont path to other parts of town. And then this is a quick review of the design goals that we had in looking at alternatives for addressing this need. Pedestrians are really the #1 concern, because there are a lot more pedestrians, again, than probably potential bike riders, and certainly existing. But we also want to provide that low stress bike network to allow a wide range of ages and abilities for people to ride. We definitely need to consider traffic circulation, because the two are all related. And another consideration is to maintain as much on-street parking as possible as a key economic and way to access downtown, and then to consider all the different modes of transportation. So with that, we came up with 4 alternatives for different arrangements of bike lanes and intersection designs. And this is for Main Street, and then we have a couple for Berry Street I'll present later. But basically, we'll kind of go over these quickly because they're not, these were studies that we went through, but basically having traffic signals at all the intersections that need a signal, and that would be definitely at Berry Street, potentially at School Street. We did look at the School Street, Main Street intersection, and it could be signalized. It has enough traffic too. It doesn't have to be, but that would be an option. The second one is roundabouts at all the intersections, and also providing bike lanes. When we put those out, we had a lot of interest in the committee to have a third option, which would be roundabout at some intersections, signals at others, and particularly a roundabout at Berry and School Street. And then the fourth option is really inspired by the Greening America's Capital report, and that was a plan that looked at changing the intersections and parking on Main Street, and assumed bikes would use Elm Street and through the Heaney-Jacobs lot, I think it's called, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. So I'll go through these with a little more illustration. So here's the existing conditions on Main Street, just for orientation. Main Street's going up and down, and then Berry Street's kind of on the lower right, heading down in the southeast direction. And then that little orange line is where we've showing a lot of cross sections, basically a slice through the street. And the diagram to the left is showing and I know you can't read all the numbers on it, but these are what we've been looking at carefully, like what is the width between the buildings and how is it currently allocated between travel lanes, parking lanes, sidewalks, et cetera. So that's our existing condition for both the pavement markings and the cross-section. And the cross-section varies a lot as you go up and down Main Street, so it's not the same everywhere. We looked at it all over, but I won't go through all the drawings. So the traffic signal and bike lane option is shown here, and there'd be a new traffic signal at Main and Berry. There could be one at School and Main, although it doesn't really affect the geometry. And basically this option involves taking away one lane of parking, and we generally done it on the east side, or the right side, hand side. And then that provides space for bike lanes on either side of the street. So that's what the cross-section here shows. It doesn't, that all fits within the existing paved areas, because the existing lanes are quite wide and can be narrowed down quite a bit and provide the room for the bike lanes. But we still need to take one lane of parking out to fit them in. So, and then the Langdon Street crosswalk was one of the topics that we looked at, and what I'll show here. We looked at a few options to relocate it. So on that diagram, the white crossing right by front of City Center is the existing crossing. We looked at one option is to bring it down, basically make it part of the signalized intersection at State Street. Another option was to move it up to the alley there, and I'm forgetting the name of the street, but it's the little Hazel Way. And that seemed to be the one that's most preferred, and I think this is probably a topic that might, have more ongoing discussion. But that brings it a little bit further from the traffic lights, so it's not so abruptly that you get through Main and State and immediately stop for a crosswalk. It'll allow a little more room for cars to stop and not feel as much that will get rear-ended. It's probably not going to solve every issue, but that seems to be the one that garnered the most interest in thinking about changing. So Main and School was another concern, and again, it does meet traffic signal warrants in terms of its volume. And we were asked to look at an always stop there by a lot of people as comments we got, and we did look at that, but it really doesn't, it's not a good candidate for that because there's a lot of traffic on Main Street compared to School Street, whereas the other intersection that had this treatment recently, which is Elm and Spring, that has much more balanced traffic, meaning the traffic's about equal, and that's a really good place to put an always stop. But this one with a lot of traffic on Main Street that every car would have to stop would be probably really frustrating and could create rear-end accidents. So that's just not a recommended treatment for that reason. So, all right, now here's the second option, which is roundabouts at all the key intersections, and then also providing bike lanes. So, and we've shown the Memorial Drive intersections kind of at the edge of our study area, but we threw in a roundabout there too. And then a roundabout at Berry Street is the next one up, and then a small, and these are smaller roundabouts to fit within the area of the right way. And then a small roundabout at State and Main, and then another roundabout at School and Main. And then one of the advantages of roundabouts is that you don't need to have left turn lanes at the intersections. So you actually can fit parking on both sides of the street and then also have bike lanes. So this option doesn't require as much parking removal compared to the signals. And just to, wanted to zoom in, this is a drawing from the Greening America's Capital report, which shows the mini roundabout at State and Main, which is pretty much the same design that we thought is, with the constrained space, it's really the only way it could work. One of the things that's important to realize is that with this design, all the traffic that comes in from East State Street has to make a right turn, and it cannot get into the roundabout just with the amount of space and the offset of the streets. It would basically be pulling in again head-on traffic. And so this makes a big change in traffic circulation that's important to understand. The other challenge of this is if we had a bike lane coming into it, bikes coming into a roundabout generally either get off onto the sidewalks and share that with pedestrians pedestrians or to ride through as traffic. And given we're thinking about the less confident riders, we'd expect a lot of people might make the choice to ride onto the sidewalk. And so the concern is you have their big, busiest corner downtown will have a mix of people biking and walking, which isn't ideal for the people walking to have them to share, more congested kind of sidewalk. Obviously, it's possible, but it's just a thing to note about how this would work. And then this is just a diagram we did along with our analysis, a lot of traffic modeling to understand the implications. And in this case, so East State Street's coming in from the sort of lower right, and because that traffic cannot turn left into continue on State Street or left on Main, anyone that wants to go continue down State Street, we've assumed would take a right and then a left on Langdon and go around the block. And anyone that wants to go left on Main Street would probably take a right on Cedar Street and then around to School Street and then around the block. So this does create, a bit of inconvenience for a fair number of people that currently make those movements. And so, the roundabout at East State Street, because of this and the sharing, there was a real mixed review in our alternatives workshop, so it wasn't beloved, and, it's intriguing, but it definitely has some concerns. And because of that, we really were asked to look at a hybrid option that would be a big roundabout at Berry Street, the first circle there, and then also a mini roundabout, or a small roundabout at School Street. So this is what we're calling the hybrid. And then as far as the parking and travel lanes, it's also kind of a hybrid. There's some areas that can have parking on both sides and bike lanes, and other areas, especially as you're getting near the traffic signals, where we need those left turn lanes, so we have to take parking off one side. So it's kind of in between in all those ways. And one of the concerns of this, of kind of mixing roundabouts with signals, is something that is a consideration that currently there's often long queues of traffic either coming from State Street down Main Street or from Memorial Drive up Main Street. And when we have a roundabout in the midst of traffic signals like that, the traffic flowing through backing up through the roundabout will mean no one from Berry Street can move at all as those queues are there. So it can have the effect of making it a lot harder for people to get out from Berry Street. So that's during peak hour, and that's maybe 1 hour of the day, or maybe not even 1 hour of the day. So just a consideration. And then the last alternative was the one based on greening America's capital. So this is a diagram of what Main Street was like in that report, from Berry Street with the roundabout up to the small roundabout at State and Main. And in that case, they actually assumed bikes would not be on Main Street, or if they're on Main Street, they'd be sharing the road, and there'd be more of a bikeway developed on Elm Street and through the parking area to connect to the bike path. And this involves kind of a reconfiguration of parking. It's not necessarily more parking, because they removed some and put it in other places. And it does include, it has the Berry Street treatment that matching what we'll be showing later as well. And then a lot of it's green stormwater infrastructure and streetscape. So. And then here's just a diagram showing what we were assuming for the Elm Street area, which would be part of this option. So for Elm Street to have a low-stress bike network, the idea is it would become a one-way street. And based on traffic, we'd suggest that the vehicle traffic would be southbound only. And then on the left side of Elm Street, we're showing a two-way bike lane. Now this could be reconfigured to have parking on the other side and bikes on one side. It's, there are probably a lot of different options, but that's the idea of having a bikeway on Elm Street, and then it would be basically some kind of a shared low-speed route through the parking area that connects the bike path. And that wasn't too well defined in the Greening America's Capital. It would require removing a whole row of parking there to make a protected bike facility. So converting Elm Street to one-way would allow room for the bikes, but we did have it, we recommend it be one way rather than removing all the parking, because the parking there is really critical for a lot of properties that have no off-street parking. And then, there will be some traffic impact as it sends traffic to other intersections. So this is the idea of what would happen. So the purple arrow shows the direction of travel on Elm Street between Port Street or School Street and State Street. And so traffic going the other way would follow the yellow areas that actually have to go through State and Main and then around the block. And so that is adding traffic to, one of the bottleneck intersections and adding a left turn, which is even a little more of an impact. So those are considerations definitely on traffic. So I'm not going to go through all the details, but we did a pretty thorough review of the pros and cons of each of the options for Main Street and really learned a lot about the different choices we have. And I'll get into more of the recommendations later on. I want to then get to Berry Street, which is another important part of the study area. And for Berry Street, we looked at basically three options. One is a shared use path, they're also called a side path, on one side of Berry Street, and it would involve basically widening the sidewalk to be the same width as a shared use path. And then it could go on, we'll talk about which side of the street it could be on, but it would require removing parking from one side of Berry Street. And that is a continuation of the kind of facility that it's going to be meeting that street segment on either side, so that was an advantage of that. There is another option I'll show, a two-way protected bike lane, which means there's a sidewalk and then a bike lanes and then traffic, or there's a one-way protected bike lane on each side. That one has to remove parking from both sides of the street, so that was one that was not really pursued further, other than to note that it was another option. So here is a layout of the shared use path, which is shown in kind of a pinkish line. And one of the important things to also note is that the design of Main Street, Berry Street intersection really affects what side of the path, right side of the street the path should be on. So if there's a roundabout, we don't have room for the crossing to all stay on the south side of Berry Street. The ideal would be to keep the whole path on the south side so it can get to the rec center, and any kids riding that have the fewest possible crossings to make. But with the roundabout right next to the railroad track, the only way is to have people go around the other side of the roundabout, and that's definitely a concern about this option. And then having the path on the north side of Berry Street does actually have a bit of a higher parking impact. That's another concern. So with the signalized option at Main Street and Berry Street, we could keep the path, again, it's kind of a pinkish line, on the south side of Berry Street the whole way. So it really is the most comfortable connection between, and up on the very upper left corner of the aerial, there's a dotted line is where the new path will be coming in. So it's kind of the easiest connection through. And then the cross-section shown below basically shows it'd be parking on one side, two travel lanes, and then it could be up to 12 foot wide. The width might vary a little bit, but a comfortably wide path to share for biking and people walking and biking to share. So this is another option where we are not changing the curbs or the sidewalks in Berry Street, and just taking one of the parking lanes and repurposing it into a two-way bike lane. And that's the green striped areas on the right of the cross-section diagram. And it would need a little bit of a separation from traffic, because you do have bikes coming one way and cars going the other way, so you want to provide a little bit of space. This is it fits within the cross-section, but it's very tight, and it's probably going to be a design that's not going to feel that comfortable, both for the cars and the people biking. But it can work, it meets the minimum standards. So it will be, in the winter maintenance of this will have to be really thought through. Will it be plowed? Keeping the parked car on the other side as close to the curb as possible is gonna be important, which would affect snow removal, so, you know, there are a few design challenges, but it's something that could fit in. And so here are, again, I don't wanna go into a lot of detail, but basically there's the shared use path in combination with the roundabout versus the signal, and that really affects what side of the, how you cross Main Street and what side of the street the path can be on. And then there's two-way protected bike lanes. And the one-way protected bike lanes are the ones that are, we really didn't pursue further because it's introducing a completely different type of facility where you have two paths and then one-way bike lanes on either side, requiring more crossing, so, and it takes all parking away, so.
Can I just ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
So in any of these scenarios, though, that means losing parking on one side of Berry
Correct,
Street?
yeah. And it's, maybe I'll go back to a drawing here. There's fewer spaces lost when it's on the south side of Berry Street than on the north side. And the thought was that parking on the north side's more important because serves a church and the laundromat.
I think it only goes down part of the way, doesn't it?
Only to the rec center.
This
Right.
goes to the rec center, just so you know, it's not all the way down Berry
It's
Street,
not all of it.
actually.
I think it was 8 parking spaces, and there's 13 on the north side. And there's a lot of driveways that limits how many parking spaces are actually there, so it's.
Right,
not as much.
I would remind the council that we did away with any parking requirements for new structures that are built there in the zoning last year. So we need to be mindful that any of those changes would have significant impacts for people who live there and might have a car if there's no parking requirement per their unit.
So here's a summary of the parking from our initial run through the options. So the existing is close to 120 on-street parking spaces just within the study area. Obviously, there's a lot of other parking, but we've just been focusing on that. And the first option, which was putting in signals and bike lanes, cuts the parking just about in half and basically getting parking off of one side of the street. A simple way to think of it. The two M2 and M3 options, those had the roundabouts or combination, and that did allow more parking to be preserved. And then the Greening America's Capital had quite a bit more parking because it didn't have bike lanes on Main Street. So, and there are a lot of other things. We looked at traffic modeling and flows, and the summary of that is the roundabouts do work better for the traffic flow than the signals. But none of these were really making anything worse than it is now, so it didn't seem to rise to the most important consideration perhaps with regard to parking. So this is a summary based on, again, a lot of conversation, probably not unanimous consensus, but of where we go with a preferred alternative. And then we also talked about short-term, because this is some big changes that would be considered in long-term. So I might focus first on the long-term column, and then the different pieces of the study area are listed there on the left. So for Main Street, the long-term recommendation will be protected bike lanes, and then combined with some access management and other things to both improve safety and also actually increase the amount of parking that could be preserved on Main Street, knowing that's important. For the Main Street and Berry Street intersection, it's recommended that we do a traffic signal rather than a roundabout, and I know that was something that, again, there wasn't full consensus, but one of the really most important reasons for that is the crossing of the bike path is much better under the signal scenario. And another advantage of that is that the city is considering an adaptive signal control system throughout the downtown, and having a signal there be part of that could really help a lot of the intersections work better, where when you have the mix of roundabouts and signals, you're not getting that much advantage from that. So for Berry Street, we recommend the side path on the south side of the street, combination of the signal is a long-term. The protected bike lane option could be a short-term first step that's very inexpensive to implement. And for the school and main intersection, a mini roundabout there was definitely well received and would be the safest. for both cars and pedestrians, people walking, biking, et cetera. And the streets there is quite wide, so it has minimal impact. So I want to go in some of the reasons about why signals, because I know there's, been a lot of discussion, especially with Reading America's Capital, about roundabouts, but a variety of concerns that help potentially tip the balance was one of them, just that need to share walking and biking on the sidewalks around the roundabouts for anybody who's not comfortable riding through the roundabout as a vehicle. Another thing about roundabouts in really downtown areas is when we look at the plans, it actually requires pedestrians to walk a bit out of the direction rather than straight across from corner to corner that they can with signals. And then there's the traffic diversion issue, especially for the State and Main intersection, that would be an inconvenience to people. And then the Berry and Main Street roundabout is going to be challenging at the very best, just because it gets right up to the railroad, and you know what dealing with the railroad is like from a lot of other projects. And it's just a very tight spot, so it's not it would be a difficult design. And then having, again, the roundabout with signals remaining would have potential traffic issues where queues would be backing through the roundabout and locking everything up. And so some of the advantages of the signal option that tip the balance is, again, the Berry Street bike path not needing to cross Berry Street. It allows for the adaptive signal control to really have more higher potential in alleviating congestion, and the coordination with the other signals will reduce. With all of them coordinated together, should reduce stops and delays through downtown. And that's wasn't, again, the main focus of our study, but with that opportunity, that helped tip that balance. So. And just want to talk a little bit about why protected bike lanes versus regular bike lanes. There's more and more cities that are building protected bike lanes. This is an example of one in Cambridge, Mass. It's obviously on a bigger, wider street, but we, from our work that we've done, we think they'll fit in Montpelier and Main Street. But it's basically having the bike at the same level as the sidewalk and separated from traffic. Cambridge, Mass is deciding this is what all bike lanes should be, and they're actually planning that they're going to convert all their bike lanes to this style, which will be tough because it does tend to impact parking. But it's really the best way to meet the goals, and Montpelier in Motion is the best practice, safest design, and they've been shown to also really encourage more people to ride, which is one of the goals of Montpelier in Motion as well. And this is I handed out 11 by 17s. They'll still be require a magnifying glass perhaps, but this is what the preferred alternative looked like. The red ribbons there are the protected bike lanes, and the cross-section there on the left shows how it would work. There'd be parking on one side. The bikes would be elevated up above the level of the curb. On the side where there is parking, we need a little buffer for people to open their doors, get out of their cars, and not hit the bikes. That fits in. And then the sidewalks would be pretty much the same width as they are now. We're not really encroaching on them. And that might vary a little from block to block, just because the width, but they'll be at least as wide or wider. And again, here's some examples. That's the one in Cambridge. There's another example in Chicago of what they can look like. They can be a different color to really demarcate them from the sidewalk. And then this is just a diagram showing the existing cross-section. This is like the pinch point in front of Rite Aid, where you have buildings as close to each other as anywhere. And the existing is on the top, and the proposed is on the bottom. And again, the sidewalks are just about identical, and it's really taking one lane of parking and narrowing the lanes to right-sizing them to what they should be. Gives us the room for that. So we also have a short term. That's like a big change. It would take a lot of work and money and time to make a change like that. But in the short term, painted bike lanes on the street would be a big improvement, and so we have a plan for that as well. And this is just restriping existing pavement. Some some other things would be providing curb extensions at some of the crosswalks. And the mini roundabout at School Street could be implemented again with more temporary kind of materials. So this would involve, scraping down the nice new pavement that you just put down and re-putting a new layer and painting it, so it's probably not something that would be done right away anyway, but it could be something to consider as the pavement starts getting a little cracked or, need a refreshment. This would also be on Berry Street, that could be the two-way protected bike lanes, again, just resurfacing existing pavement. And that could be, obviously, it doesn't all be done all at once. Berry Street could go ahead much sooner. And so I want to talk a little bit too about rapid implementation. A lot of cities that are wanting to really build out bike lanes, bike networks, are using a combination of, capital construction and then what we call quick build methods, which is more with paint, flexible bollards, plastic flower pots, other things to help redefine the space on the streets a little bit differently to make them safer for walking and biking. And so two of the things that could be good candidates for this kind of approach would be the Berry Street protected bike lanes, which would be the two-way bike lanes on one side, and also the School Street mini roundabout. These could be done quite inexpensively. Here's a few examples of similar projects. Burlington's been doing a lot with quick build, and photos might be a little hard to see, but the top right is South Union Street, where they have plastic curbing just nailed into the road or bolted in, and then flexible posts that sometimes get knocked down and need to be replaced, but they do keep cars from encroaching in the bike lane, which is a real big issue there. And then on the lower right are just using paint, an epoxy surface that's colored, flower pots, and plastic bollards with reflectors. You can create curb extensions much more cheaply than using curbs and more permanent methods. And eventually that might all become permanent, but for now you can get a lot of benefit from it. And then on the left is just a picture from Sao Paulo, Brazil, where they actually create a roundabout using these techniques. And there are places in the U.S. that have done that as well, but you can do a lot with paint and lines as long as you have reflectors and other safety. And there's more and more like design standards to follow to do this kind of project. So as we looked at the refined short and long-term alternatives, we did really try to bring back as much parking as we could. So we've got the existing parking is about 120 spaces on the two streets, and we have the short-term option preserves more than 80. I think it's about 85. Really give you exact number. And the long-term, it loses a few more parking spaces, but we basically tried to save as many as we can. And that is a net change of 40 parking spaces. And it's hard to know the exact numbers till you really go through more of the design with the survey and whatnot. But that would be our estimate of what the parking impact would be. And now cost. So I've now started with the short-term costs, and then I'll go to the long-term costs. So for Main Street to basically scrape down the pavement and do all the new pavement markings to put in bike lanes and rearrange parking is more than $500,000. We're estimating at current prices $565,000. And as we know, prices go up every year, so if you try this in 3 years, which might be more realistic given the pavement's new, it's probably going to be more than that. But it's not inexpensive. But that's pretty much just cost of redoing the pavement and redoing it by grinding it down and not trying to rub out the lines. For the intersection, to put a short-term, put in a traffic light is about $200,000, and that's pretty. It'll require some right-of-way or railroad coordination probably, but it's not a difficult project generally. For the Berry Street, doing the protected bike lanes as a quick build kind of approach with just the inexpensive materials, it's a budget about $50,000. And then the School and Main intersection, the mini roundabout could also be done with quick build, and we put in a budget of $30,000. These kind of things could be done a lot more cheaply depending on what you select. So this is maybe kind of an upper limit, assuming you want it with some flower starting with Main Street and building protected bike lanes and doing some, curb relocation, stormwater relocation, traffic control and other things is about 1.2 million. Now, if you were gonna do that kind of major project on Main Street, you'd probably wanna do more with more tree planting and green stormwater infrastructure, so this cost doesn't include all those kind of elements. We're really just focusing on what is the cost to get the infrastructure for the bikes in place. And it would obviously be best to do this all in one big effort, which I think with the upcoming master planning effort, that would be the outcome of that, is knowing more about what would be included in that project. For the Berry and Main Street, we've sort of divided the signal to be first put a signal in, and then the next estimate of $200,000 is the cost to do the adaptive signal control to tie it in with all the other intersections and make it a lot more efficient. And that's an estimate we got from the provider of the technology. On Berry Street, to actually go for the long term and build the side path on the south side is about $250,000. We're assuming it's an asphalt path that involves some relocation of stormwater, a few utility poles, parking meters, that kind of thing. And then the School and Main Street intersection to do a more permanent kind of mini roundabout with curbing, more attractive, would be about $175,000. And again, these are costs, sort of today's costs, and they could need to be escalated out in the out years. So, and the priorities based on really what we heard from a lot of people throughout the study is number one would be the traffic signal at Berry Street with the pedestrian crossing is an urgent kind of low-hanging fruit. Number two, the School Street mini roundabout, and again, this a quick build approach would be a low cost. Number three, the Berry Street protected bike lanes, and to be timed with when the bike path is complete is really, and so when that happens might depend on all the coming together. And then eventually the side path, and then the Main Street design, obviously not necessarily lower priority, but a longer term action that there'd be some more master planning done for the whole streetscape that would be important to combine them. So our next steps, well, we'd like to get input from you and any of the city staff is reviewing it and the committee, and by the end of the April, we'd like to get all that input and make revisions. We have to have the report reviewed by V-Trans. They provide the funding for the study, and then once we get their comments, final revisions. And I don't expect major comments from them, so it won't be like, I want to change everything. And try to close out this by the end of May is our goal, when there'd be another city council presentation before then. So.
The one thing I would add to this slide is it will go to the Transportation Infrastructure Committee again before it comes here.
So that is what I have, and I have no questions I have to answer, or maybe you've heard enough and move on, as you'll have time to digest it.
Well, thank you. I think this is very exciting. This is a really big deal for our community. Gosh, one of the things that we hear a lot about on the council is there's complaints about traffic or feeling safe on the streets, or anyway, all things traffic related. So one of the things that I was curious about with the next steps, excuse me, I know you've done a lot of outreach to the community, and as a resident of Berry Street, I remember you soliciting input from people in the area, and one of the things that I'm very interested in is now that there's some sort of preliminary results that are out and some suggestions to talk about, I would love to have, especially for the Berry Street implications, I would love to have some kind of a meeting, like host some kind of a event, maybe at the senior center, to say, hey, Berry Street community, here's a plan and some ideas. What do you think about this? And just continue that dialogue. I don't know if you feel like you've already done that, but I think I would find that useful, just to have that experience even myself. So I just want to put that out there to you all, that that's something that I'm going to offer up my time to do, probably when school's out. So sometime in mid to late June, try to have some kind of a Berry Street community meeting about some of the Berry Street particularly, some of those implications. So that's one thing. Other comments or questions from the council? Connor.
You referenced sort of like a one-way Elm Street there, but I didn't see anything for Elm Street on the recommendations. Does that mean just leave it as is, or?
Yeah, we recommending having the bike lanes on Main Street, which means Elm Street stays as is.
Okay, thanks.
And that was, because that was part of the alternative that didn't happen.
And just a question on public input. I think, first, I agree with the mayor completely, just as far as having a really robust conversation. And I would expand that to talk about, when I canvassed on Barry Street, there were issues about lighting, how many rubbish bins there were for, I think a lot of people are feeling a bit neglected there, so maybe it could be in a
Sure.
broader conversation.
Sure.
As far as public input, how many responses did you get on this? And I know that's not maybe easy to say, because some of it was the interactive map, some of it was the town meeting day stuff. Just kind of trying to get a handle on that.
I think it was in the hundreds. I don't know if you
Okay.
saw the dots on that.
Okay.
And that may not have been 100 different people.
Great.
And there was a.
There was a good response.
I'm not sure if you mentioned this, there was a, alternatives presentation to the public as well. That was held here. And we had also videotaped that meeting and offered it on our website so people could review and add comments on the website. That basically presented all of the alternatives that you saw to the public.
Great.
Yeah, and then it's also kind of workshop where we had them all printed out and people could drill into them. Put post-it notes with their ideas or tell us their ideas, so we're very open to input, and it's hard to
Cool.
always get everyone that wants to eventually have something to say, but.
All right, others.
Donna.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would just, I, as a former Berry Street resident myself for many years, I think that we actually need to take this out to the neighborhood. I think it's a really, I realize that it's eight spaces, is one of the proposals, but that in reality translates to people just parking further down on Berry Street where residents park, because not all of those units, particularly the ones closer to town, have parking, which segues into my second ask, which is, I know how the council voted last time, but it was a split vote that we reconsider the parking requirements in not the designated downtown core, but I think it was that outer area, because there are places there that don't have parking, and you're still paying Montpelier rent, but you have to have a car if you need to work anywhere other than pretty much Montpelier. So I would hope that if the council is really going to consider this, one, that we would all make the effort to show up in the Berry Street neighborhood to talk about why this is important, but that we would also be willing to have another look at what parking requirements are going to be for dwelling units, because if you work in Waterbury or even in Barry, if I have to work late, I can't take the bus home. So just, I would like to shamelessly plug that.
Thank you. Donna.
Well, actually, I support parking requirements everywhere, because it forces business owners to then get creative about transit, remote parking. So it's not just residential area, so you have my support there. I definitely am very disappointed, because only since this very last draft, suddenly roundabouts lost because of state and Maine configuration. And I'm still pushing for roundabouts. I have traveled all over the world, and particularly my lots of visits to Sweden. In the smallest areas with odd shaping streets and intersections, the roundabout works. And I've found a whole lot of examples, but I don't have all the degrees. So I'm still pushing for roundabouts, because this is very decisive. If we don't put roundabouts in because of one intersection, when we could put them not only all the way down Main Street, but ultimately in the Barry Montpelier Road, Memorial Drive, roundabouts really work. Not only does it slow down traffic, but the statistics, some 75% less of any kind of injury crashes. And interchange, 35% as far as movement of traffic improvement. So I'm just a roundabout supporter. I was there when the first one went in, and people said it couldn't be done for all sorts of reasons. And I know engineers have the final say, but I know there's some that do support them in odd places, and so I'm still searching, because I really want that opportunity to have them all the way down, because they really make the whole atmosphere so much different. Once you have a signal, all your other roundabouts won't work as well. So it just is a really much better flow. So I'm still there. I'm also supporting the shared path on Berry Street. I've had a lot of those in Europe and Sweden where bikes and people use the same space, so that on Berry Street, from the intersection of Berry and Main down to where you take the rec building and go back to the bike shared use path, I really see that as a way to use the limited space without taking so much off the road and still being safe for people and bikes. You have signage that says shared, it shows a person and a bike. It works in very much larger places like Stockholm with a lot more traffic. So I think we could do it here. So those are my two biases. Thank you.
Thank you. Jack. Oh, and then Glenn.
Oh,
No.
I've got a few observations. One, I'm with you on roundabouts. I don't know all the places they should go. I definitely see them on the Main and School Street intersection. I see pushing them out State Street also. I think Bailey Avenue is an intersection that could be, the signals could be replaced by a roundabout, and possibly Elm Street also, which is a difficult intersection a lot of the day. One of the things that I thought of, that I did in getting ready for tonight, and I don't know if this is something you looked at, but I talked to Fred Wilbur, whom many of us know. Fred owned Bookspieler for many, many years, and a few years ago he came out with a proposal to improve the pedestrian experience in the center of town by I'll pass this out. It's the idea is basically to take the whole space from the State and Main intersection to Langdon Street and turn that all into a pedestrian zone for the pedestrian cycle of the traffic light. And I don't know if anyone's looked at that seriously. Fred spent time on his own trying to promote this, but while we're looking at how to redesign the pedestrian and motor vehicle interactions, I think it's worth at least making this part of the conversation. As I think of the Langdon Street crosswalk and relation to the State and Main intersection, one of the concerns that I always have is not whether I'm going to be rear-ended, but people using the crosswalk drive northbound traffic on Main Street back into that intersection. So so that ties things up in a way that it makes it hard to get through there. And the other thing that's a real peeve of mine is people driving southbound on Main Street. When the light turns red, they block Langdon Street. They don't stop at the crosswalk, and again, that ties up traffic because people who would be turning left onto Langdon Street can't make that turn because just one person has decided to pull right up into the line of traffic. And so those are things that I'd like to see us address.
Great. Glenn.
First, I want to echo the mayor's thanks for the presentation. It's really exciting and great. I've been thinking about this for a while. I use almost this whole area daily as a pedestrian. I walk down from my house on Prospect Street on the other side of the river to the drawing board and then down into downtown all the time. And I think that you've identified a lot of really good options. Want to register my general philosophical support with Donna's for roundabouts and Jack's. I do, the reasons why not a roundabout at State and Main make sense to me. It does seem really awkward to make everyone coming off East State turn right. I can't see an easy way around that one. And also, if it's true, and I see no reason to disbelieve it, that putting a roundabout at Main and Barry means that the bike path has to cross the street and go on the north side of Barry Street, that also seems like a pretty big negative. I think that the bike path should not have to cross over there. In general, I like the suggested path forward. It all looks pretty good. I'm curious if and this is sort of like what Jack was saying about the Main and State intersection stretching up to Langdon Street. In M1, there's the kind of off-rectangular area of that whole intersection set up as free pass zone while the walk light is going. So rather than 4 separate crosswalks, there you can cross from TD Bank straight across to La Brioche, or that is diagonally across to La Brioche, and that seems like a good element to me. And I was curious why that element did not continue through into the other options, if there's an answer.
I don't know if there's really a final determination. I think that could be, and it's not a big
Yep.
change. We did
Right.
look at some other more significant
Right.
changes, and, everything's on a tight dial, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that, and it's hard to see with the light, but that could certainly be
Yeah.
incorporated pretty easily without much change.
I think I like that. It feels like a good element. The other thing I'm curious about is I spend a lot of time down at the bottom left at the Memorial Drive, Main Street Northfield intersection, waiting for that light. And I would love it if that were a roundabout, but I mean, I can imagine if the next intersection up isn't a roundabout, then that's going to be problematic, as you described, because then the roundabout gets packed up.
Probably not so much for that, because the Berry Street volumes are not that high.
Yeah.
So we don't expect long queues. We don't
Yeah,
expect that to
okay,
be a
right.
bottleneck. It's more that when you have the bottleneck at Memorial Drive and at State, those spill into
Okay.
Berry Street.
So,
So I think a roundabout at Memorial could definitely be on the
Okay.
table. And it's, because that's on the state system, it was sort of the edge of our study
right,
area.
yeah, yeah.
Make a strong recommendation either way, but I think that could be something that could be amended.
I'm in favor of that.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? So making a roundabout at Memorial Drive makes it easier to have a roundabout at Berry and Main?
I think
Is
they're
that what you're
not
saying?
really related. I think Memorial Drive could have a roundabout regardless. of what
Regardless,
happens, yeah.
okay.
And the reason is because Berry Street would not be expected to be a bottleneck
Yeah,
that
okay.
forms queues.
Okay.
It's more that the queues from the signal back into Berry Street.
I think, so I'm going to call on myself here. I think that's very interesting for Memorial Drive. I will offer that I'm a skeptic of a roundabout at Berry and Main because of the proximity to the train as well as the implications for the bike path. I'm open to being convinced, especially if you have some examples, particularly near interfacing with trains. So that's one thing. I also just want to make sure that I remember to say that I appreciated that you have a list of implementation priorities, because obviously even with the short-term possible projects. We're not going to be doing all of those all at the same time, and I agree that figuring out the Barry Main Street intersection is the highest priority. So whether it's a roundabout or it's a signal, that to me also floats to the top of the things that we should be doing. And if this timeline holds and we are able to have some conversations with the Berry Street community over the summer, we should be potentially in a good place to talk about that in time for the budgeting season for the next fiscal year. So I just want to make sure that that's all on our radars as well as we queue that up for next budgeting cycle. Yes, Donna. Oh, and then Lauren.
I'm just asking about timing. You keep talking about the Berry neighborhood in June. You wouldn't want to do that before it goes back to V-Trans?
Well, I guess we could. I'm just thinking that was me being,
No,
realistic
I'm
with my own
asking.
schedule. But
'Cause it
if
would
that
be
would be useful to you, then we can try to do that before May 31st.
Right.
Okay, so if they want it by May and they consider it done, that doesn't mean we can't adapt
It
it.
doesn't exactly. I
Right.
thought this is a living.
Just so, I just
Yeah.
wanted you to understand there's a final product due in
Yes,
May.
yes, that's right. Unless you
Then we still have decisions to make
Right.
once we, so
Regardless.
you're just trying to finalize the report, then we have a process for making
Yeah,
decisions
you're
after
not
you.
by no means obligated to do everything in the
Right.
report. If you accept the report that we
Yeah.
did what
And
we said
I have
we were
one
gonna.
further question about that, just to clarify. So, I mean, at least in your presentation, for the short-term costs of the Berry Main Street intersection, it was $200,000, and then the long-term solution was $200,000. Is that because it's not? It looks like it's not totally the same.
It's not the same, no, and it's just coincidence.
Okay.
The 200,000 for the long term is really tying all the signals together.
Okay,
So is that,
and that's
you know,
if.
that's a lot more benefits and
Yeah.
implications than just
Okay.
having a light signal.
Interesting. So potentially, if we spend $200,000 on the one but for the traffic signal only, and then we decide to do the long term, then we would be spending an additional $200,000 to replace or update whatever signal had been put in.
No, with the new signal would be capable of being.
Okay.
put in, So it wouldn't.
Okay, so that's
there
not a
would be no
new
waste of
200,000.
money in that.
Oh, okay. Just wanted to make sure.
Signals are 200,000, the coordinated signals are another 200,000, and then the path on Berry Street's another 250,000.
Right. No, I'm not talking about the
Coordinating is
path.
more
So it is.
software
You're saying it is
technology.
an additional 200,000.
Right, there's 200 to coordinate all the signals, and then
Right.
200 just to put the initial
Oh,
signal.
okay.
in.
Oh, okay. So,
Yeah.
but it wouldn't
Yeah.
have been a
So
wasted
the
200,000
second
the first time.
200 to
Okay.
coordinate them.
Oh, okay.
Hardware, software.
Got you.
Hardware,
Thank you. Okay, that's
technology,
helpful.
not signals.
Nope.
Appreciate that.
Eh,
Oh, and we got Tom and unless it's
Well,
unless it's
my
short.
question has to do with timing. So it's true that once you report the
thank you.
report in and you get it, you still can change it. But is it also not true, I'm asking those who apply for grants, if you apply for a grant to get money to help do some of the things in this study, does not AOT look to say, well, why are you changing this or that? Do they challenge it, or is it okay? Because often they ask what you've done and whether you've studied it.
Right, but I think you can make amendments to it. I mean, I don't think you can radically change it. So we did this study, this gave us the alternatives, the pros and cons. We've selected this, but we modified it slightly because of these reasons. I mean, they're still evaluating the project that you're applying the grant for.
Yes, okay.
Tom and then Lauren. I assume your thing, Tom, had to do with what we were just talking about?
More general.
Oh, okay. Actually, I'm going to go to Lauren then next, if that's okay.
So I am also a general fan of roundabouts. It sounds like a lot of roundabout love here. I'm hearing the concerns with the Berry Street. So one thing I'm thinking about is it's intriguing, this kind of low-cost option for the roundabout at School Street. And I'm just thinking like sequencing the kind of comfort in the community, and would also just urge public outreach with the school, like as a parent driving to the school a lot, and that is a horrible intersection when you're dealing with that. And so just thinking of outreach to the school and the parents that are doing that drive every day and getting input and hopefully building some comfort if we're going to go that route with that, so that when that goes in, hopefully it's a success and people really like it. And maybe that's something we could do, try to do sooner than later, and then see how the community is responding to a roundabout in general.
Cool, it's a great idea. Tom?
Hi, so Tom McCardle, Public Works. Just a few things. One on the costs. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think these are more order of magnitude.
Yeah,
the
they're
levels of
planning
the
level,
planning level
sure.
until you get into design. It wouldn't be inconceivable, for example, Berry, Maine, whether it be a roundabout or signal, could more than double that cost once you get into actual design. So just keep that in mind. These are just numbers to give you order of magnitude. We all know where these costs can go. And another is, we did look at Memorial, Maine, the Route 212 intersection as a roundabout. We had a well-known roundabout expert, Howard McCullough, do that for us a few years ago, several years ago. And that is still on our website, if you'd like to look at that. What that would look like, it's a high volume traffic, it's a partially two-lane roundabout. There are access issues and fitting it, circle into a square hole. We all know how difficult that can be, and although I've tried. So mostly the the gas station access, the ledges, the proximity to the river, a lot of constraints there to consider. It is workable, but that is a high impact, high cost roundabout. And lastly, back to what Donna was talking about as far as roundabouts and signals not necessarily working together. It was actually the same person and other roundabout experts who pointed out the benefits of sometimes having roundabouts and signals working together in unison. Traffic signals will tend to create platoon flow. That can be beneficial in how we organize traffic and how it arrives at intersections. And roundabouts are constantly spitting out traffic, and so they can actually work to the benefit when they are a roundabout, a signal, a roundabout, depending on what the traffic engineer sees for what they're trying to accomplish, what the issues are, how their driveways are intersecting, a lot of different things that need to be considered when looking at that. So roundabout is one tool in our toolbox to manage intersection traffic flow. It's not the only one, and I think pedestrians are a big one. And as under the ADA, for somebody who's visually impaired, locating a crosswalk and not having those visual cues is something that also has had a lot of attention lately, and they've actually signalized some roundabouts. There are roundabouts that have been removed because of pedestrian and bike issues. So there's a lot that goes into the decision points of this, and so I was on the fence about roundabouts when we started looking at them 15, 20 years ago. I can see that is one tool that we should consider all of the implications, all the constraints that we have to work with.
Question?
Sure, go ahead, Donna, and then Glenn.
I just, because of that expertise about roundabouts and lights, what happens with that extra long pedestrian crossing time that we have?
So
In
that's
the middle of all of that?
Yeah, so that's the negative side of a traffic signal, is there's a lot of wasted time. There's the clearance time, the yellow, and then the all red time. The pedestrian crossings are timed for the longest crosswalk, and they just increased this limit, I think it's 3.1 seconds, or feet per second, so for an aging population, so there's a lot of time. The interesting part about Berry and Maine, that signal timing is designed on the longest crosswalk that's out there, but if we were to run a crosswalk from La Brioche over to Cool Jules, a lot of people do it, but we would have to time that signal for that 3.1 feet per second, which would be a very long pedestrian time. So that's the nice thing about roundabouts, is there's no wasted time, there's no clearance time, there's no all red time, and pedestrians cross one lane at a time and then have those safe refuges in between the lanes. So that's a distinct advantage of a roundabout over a signal. There's no wasted time. I hope you ask about also the adaptive signal technology.
That was what I was going to ask.
That's, I think that's exciting new technology. It's important. I think the number's wrong though on that. I believe the estimate we got is 300, not the 200, but that included memorials. Okay, so you did that. All right, so adaptive traffic signal technology is, just as it states, it adapts. It's smart technology. It adapts to actual demands with video, true video technology, and there are algorithms to help the to communicate between traffic signals. So one traffic signal is speaking to another one. It's a figure of speech. And so what that does is it will take a traffic signal phasing out of sequence to respond to traffic demands. So if you're all familiar with the Main and Berry intersection, you know that the pedestrian phase always comes up after East State Street. There's no car on East State Street, and it'll go right to the pedestrian phase. Adaptive signals will adjust based on actual demands. It will know that a vehicle's been waiting on East State Street, but I'm not going to serve that now because I know I've got platoon flow coming from this intersection that's in sequence, it's coordinated. I've got to serve that first. I'm going to fit in this East State Street, a couple of cars over here. I've got a pedestrian waiting over here. I'm going to fit that in, and then I'm going to let these other cars come in, and it just constantly adapts and syncs. And that's, to me, is far more efficient. It's going to take some getting used to, because if you're waiting, we'll start stepping out of the crosswalk, and you know, East State Street just went, and it's like, oh boy. So you actually have to take care, actually look at the cues that you're being provided.
So some of the results that we've seen from this at similar communities, it looks like we could probably expect somewhere between 20 and 40% less.
Hey, Corey,
stop
could you
delay.
speak into the
Oh,
mic?
sorry.
Yeah.
20 to 40% less stop delay throughout the corridor, and also 20 to 40% less stops for vehicles through the corridor.
And that's what makes it real exciting. You don't have those cars stopped idling unnecessarily at an intersection. People are moving, less wasted time for those clearances.
Yeah, so my particular question on the adaptive signaling, which does sound really cool, is there any data on how robust it is? It feels like it depends on a fair amount of software always working and all of the connections working and so on, where, for example, compared to roundabouts, all it needs is the shape. You don't need any tech. So
You don't need to call Tom on the weekends when it doesn't work.
for example. So, I mean, obviously.
Challenge accepted, Tom.
That gets old real fast.
I mean, I imagine that these signals, the adaptive signals, are relatively new. There might not be a ton of data on that, but do you have any sense of what we could expect with that, or?
So there's always a fail-safe with these systems. Go back to either localized control over that intersection if there's a network issue, or it would go to the old traffic signal systems, which were terribly inefficient, which is a fixed time. So everybody gets 30 seconds on this street or 10 seconds on this. So there are fail-safe systems. State of Vermont is using that now. They just installed one in Waterbury. And where else did they tell us, Corey?
They have one, it's been in place for a few years now in Essex, coming up in 2 weeks.
So not much in Vermont, but it's being used widely, so.
Okay, I would love to open this up to the public if the public has any comments, questions.
John Snell. I'm mainly a pedestrian, have mainly been a pedestrian, but of late with a bad knee, I'm driving more, so I play both ways. One of the questions I have is, can anything be done to reduce traffic on Berry Street coming into town that would make a difference?
I'm not sure if you mean to reduce the volume.
The volume of traffic, yeah.
So, well, that wasn't, I guess, in our charge to look, so.
And
there-
in
there aren't-
general,
there aren't many
are
options.
you forecasting increased traffic volumes, or the same, or will there be a reduction?
We looked at the forecast generally as for increase based on growth and development.
Yeah.
So we
Well-
did use that in our
I'd love to see whether there's any option for taking cars off Berry Street and putting them on Memorial Drive, Berlin Street instead. What's that? Close the bridges. Closer, you could do that, yeah, plant trees in the middle.
Well, actually, you know, I'm not a traffic engineer, but just anecdotally, what I hear from people is, I think, and you know, this cuts both ways, because the Granite Street Bridge is one of the most historic bridges in the state. But it is a very narrow bridge, and I think people are dissuaded from using it. A more functional bridge there might then create another traffic alternative for people rather than going all the way into town. But I don't know how that models out and the flows and all that kind of stuff. But I know a lot of people don't like using that bridge.
Can I jump on to your question there? Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you
Yeah.
here. No. I forgot to ask. Was one of the things you considered making Berry Street one-way? Or was that not in the?
It was never seriously considered at
Okay.
all. It was a suggestion,
Okay.
but given there's, I think someone said Stonecutter's Way, but the amount of inconvenience
Mm-hmm.
is really beyond what I would ever recommend, because, you know, one-way streets can work when there's a block, so you just have to go around the block. But
Sure.
when it's a long.
So it's a long way.
like
There's not a lot of
going up Elm, we didn't
cut-throughs.
want to have people go all the way up Elm Street.
And
to
everyone would have to
Spring
turn
Street, for
left
example.
onto Stonecutters to go out that way
Yeah, yeah.
from Maine.
Yep.
So,
Okay.
yeah,
Thank
as
you.
long as
Just want to make sure I
that's
asked
the
that.
way. Yeah, it was definitely a suggestion, yeah.
Okay. Great. Ashley.
I would assume in conjunction with this would be some traffic calming measures, particularly in like the Berry Street area, some raised tables or something along those lines. Just, I think with the addition of some new commercial properties that are coming in that are supposed to attract more people, you know, that's sort of a straight shot if you're coming from downtown Montpelier and headed out to the co-op or to Caledonia Spirits. You know, as someone who's lived there, and I'm sure the mayor has seen this too, people fly when there is an opportunity to do so down Berry Street, and there are lots of families, children, you know, scofflaws like myself not crossing on a crosswalk, you know, but it just, in terms of, you know, making sure that we're doing this like holistically, traffic calming, I think is a pretty clutch piece in that area too.
Jack.
I have a friend who lives on Barry Street, and he just talks about how scary it is to try to cross at some of the crosswalks because of traffic. I can also report that at the Montpelier Transportation Infrastructure Committee last week, we spent some time talking about the process of developing our traffic calming policy. And so that is moving forward. Criteria and process and everything, so it's definitely something that's in the works.
Great. Thank you. Tom, did you have something more?
Yeah, just quickly on the traffic volume question, and Lucy mentioned that you forecast an increase. Those forecasts, if you could speak to the actual trending that we've seen over the last 10, 15 years of actual flat line or decrease in traffic. So we continue to design for a 1% or 0.5% increase in the design year, but reality is we've seen the numbers drop significantly. Particularly Main Street, Berry Street. I don't have the latest from regional planning, but can you speak to that, Lucy? Is that
Sure.
what you found?
We looked at the trends of traffic. It was also interesting to look at a study that was done, I'm going to guess in 2005 maybe, that had forecasts of traffic for now, and we're way lower than what they were forecasting. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We're seeing that all around Vermont, but it's partly an aging population. People are moving through their years where they drive the most into years of their life where they don't drive as much. There's just the economy changing. There's probably a lot of different factors for that, but traffic is flat even though there is growth, so it's not because we're not growing at all.
Yep.
And I know for the roundabout on Memorial Drive, that study was done even earlier, and that forecasted a huge amount of growth. And it did actually require a larger roundabout for that, but we feel like we can get away with a smaller roundabout than that study was suggesting, because we're just not seeing growth. So we did look at, there's there's still recommendations that maybe 1% per year kind of growth is what you look at. So that's the kind of growth it's kind of a safety factor more than a real observed trend.
Great, thank you. Glenn?
Just on that, that's really interesting to hear, also because early in the draft that got sent around to us before the meeting, there's a little graph of pedestrian volumes on Main Street, and that also goes down. So it's I don't know what to say about that, but it sounds like we are getting less pedestrian traffic, less car traffic, and somehow more people.
So, and I think, I would say that pedestrian,
Everyone's
we only
staying
have
home.
counts at one point. And
Okay.
maybe there was a store that was more popular,
Okay,
more
so,
people walk by,
yeah.
and then people are going.
Okay.
So we're tracking, we have a lot of counts all over, so we have a much more robust set of data. So hopefully we'll bring them back with some.
Pedestrian counts are always so erratic, they're difficult.
Hi, I'm Eve Jacobs. I'm Eve Jacobs Carnahan. I live on Sabin Street, and really glad to see this proposal. I worked on the Montpelier in Motion plan, which is referred to as the bicycle pedestrian master plan. So it's great to get to this stage. So I would really like to urge you to move toward a long-term solution in the short term, like sooner rather than later, because if we make these kind of bold revisions, whichever version you take, this is the kind of thing that's going to attract people to Montpelier by making it really a livable city. We have little sections of shared use paths, bike paths around, and they don't connect. And we have, we have a friendly-ish downtown, but there's all these terrible places to cross the streets, and there's all sorts of broken sidewalks and problems with that. But if we do these kind of bold revisions and really improve the streetscape, that'll make visitors stop and stay, and it will make people want to live here who don't want to depend on cars, the generations of people who don't buy cars all the time. So I think that is really, really important to move quickly out of the short term and head to the long-term solutions as soon as possible. On a couple of particular things, there's been conversation about having Berry Street community give input into the actual proposal. I think the whole city needs to give input into it because it is a proposal that will affect the life of all of us. It will affect how everyone moves through town in a car, on a bike, by walking, and especially when we have the new shared use path that's going to come and end up at next to Shaw's. All those people who want to get onto that or come off of it are going to need to cross Main Street or go along Main Street, and I think we've got to have input from everyone about the actual proposal because it's the next stage of having input in the planning. So I think you should think more broadly about having some kind of forum that everybody gets to give input into. And there's a couple of particular things that I'm curious about. I looked just in the last day at what was available through the agenda, and so I haven't digested all of it, but I think it'd be helpful to highlight in all the Main Street versions, the M1, M2, M3, what it's like to cross Main Street on a bike or as a pedestrian, because I couldn't easily compare all those, and it looked as if some were easier than others based on where there was a crosswalk and what happened, and it wasn't always listed as an advantage or disadvantage. And then another question I had is whether the evaluation took into account any possible impacts from the parking garage that is perhaps going to change some traffic patterns and draw people in or out in a different way than happens now. And I didn't know that. I couldn't see, but I didn't look at all 47 pages.
Great. Well, thank you. That's a great suggestion about the broader community weighing in on the.
Is there, can you tell us whether you took into account what the new parking garage might have as an impact?
Well, we really just focused on what the changes would be from the bike lanes, and it's knowing that
I was thinking the traffic pattern, because you were talking about things like volume of traffic. The traffic movement, yeah, would it bring people, like, especially if it means people coming on Elm Street, I guess you sort of ruled out some of the Elm Street changes, but if people are having to come from East State Street or from Main Street or from Elm Street and go through one of these intersections to get to or from the parking garage, then that may have an impact on which of these versions, whether it's a roundabout or something that allows you to turn right or go straight or not turn right or go straight. That just might be more critical than it might have appeared if you didn't have a funnel of extra cars going through there. But I don't know if that's going to send more cars there or not. I just wanted to be sure it was thought about.
Thank you. Yeah, good question. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, or
Hi, Mary Messier. I missed how long it is between this process where you present the ideas and where this actually might come to some decisions. I missed, is there a timeline for that? I couldn't quite read the printing there, project timeline.
so they're expecting to have the final form of the report done and presented to the council by the end of May, so May 31st. And then the council, like we were sort of mentioning, that we'll probably have our own process to decide how we prioritize the projects, or if we want to actually do any of them. And then it's likely that that might be built into the any first steps to pay for any changes that are that are the highest priority, would be built into the next year's budget, which would start in 2020,
Okay.
July of 2020 at the soonest.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, and I'm new to this, but the time period where people give a lot of suggestions and then people work on the ideas and the planning, and then from there where people can look at those ideas and planning and say, do we want this or not? And I think that piece ought to be a good piece of time with the community too, to review all these things, because this is a lot of information in here. It's a lot of changes, and I will hope that's enough time for people to really consider what's being proposed. I mean, that's what a lot of things are up against, a lot of decisions and stuff. In the long run, I wish there was no traffic in town, no cars. I wish we had like 8 satellite parking areas from the different directions coming into town. And I wish none of the State Street, Main Street, none of this section had cars. And I think we could accommodate that with other vehicles that aren't cars, and accommodate people with disabilities, and with vehicles that may be electric powered that can carry 5 or 6 people from satellite areas into downtown, where they can walk, bicycle, ride a scooter, ride a trike, ride a horse, ride a mule, whatever works, because in the future too, that 30 years out or 20, we probably won't have these kind of vehicles that much, I don't know how long it'll take, but there'll be a lot of big changes coming in, so I hope that's my thing for the future. I hope that downtowns don't have to do all these roundabouts and all this stuff for cars anyways.
All right,
That's
thank
my
you.
2 cents. Thank you.
Stephen Whitaker, Montpelier. I'll drive the first Uber mule.
Awesome.
I think that we are realizing the limits of our planning when we have too many variables in the mix. We don't know whether we will or will not have a garage. We don't know whether we will or will not have a train. Reducing load off of Berry Street via a Bud car coming in from Pioneer Street is the logical and immediately available solution. So I understand it's a very complex calculus with maybe too many moving parts,
But one thing that came to mind is we need to decide sooner than later, y'all need to decide sooner than later, is whether in the process of all this construction, we are gonna potentially adopt the ideas that I mentioned earlier of the architect who went blind and made his city so accessible to blind people through textures and grooves on the sidewalks. I think it's a brilliant application to Montpelier. We've got such a friendly, perfect city to become, the accessible capital for the sight impaired, and provided we could do it safely, but it takes a comprehensive, systematic, citywide design at the same time so that we don't miss an opportunity of each section of walk going in level, stable, with the proper grooves and the proper textures to aid that kind of navigation. I'll reference you back to the 60 Minutes episode that detailed all this. There's privacy implications to the video of adaptive traffic signaling. Who gets that data and for what purposes? Distinguishing a plan from a concept. We've basically got a concept now, and taking that all the way to the planning level is something I'm running into with, a state house wiring plan. It's a concept, it's not a plan. And do you start building, and what are the repercussions or potential pitfalls of starting to build when you don't have a plan? The historic bridge, the Grand Street Bridge, I noticed in Richmond, they took a very historic bridge and they strengthened it and expanded its width. They added one more section, so it might be a model worth considering for Grand Street. That's enough for now. Thanks.
Thank you.
Constantinos Tavares. I'd just like to say that in terms of getting hung up on things like parking, we should be thinking about what we want our city to look like in the future and what kind of transportation we will be having. So for example, there is a microtransit pilot that will possibly be happening sometime in the future, I think in the next year or two, which would probably reduce the amount of traffic on there. We currently have, I think, about 1,100 people that live within Montpelier that commute to work also in Montpelier. So those would be probably a good cohort of people that would be served by good public transportation, therefore reducing the needs for parking downtown. So we could have more space in our downtowns for human activity and less for inert hunks of metal just sitting on our streets. So I think just thinking into the future, what will our city look like should be something we need to consider. And so roundabouts, more bike lanes, different types of transportation, less of the single occupancy vehicle should be something that we should be pushing towards.
And sorry, where are you from?
Oh, I live here in Montpelier.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yep. Yeah, I'm also on MTIC. I was on the steering committee
Super.
for this as well.
Thank you.
But
Awesome.
yeah, myself.
Yeah, awesome. Super. All right, any further comments? Well, this is very exciting. It feels like we are at the beginning of further conversation, and looking forward to having those conversations. So, to be continued. Thank you all for your work on this. I know you've spent so much time on it. So, yeah, very grateful. All right. How are we doing, team? Do you need a break?
Yes, please.
Okay, let's take 5 minutes. Hey, dear public. Great, super, thank you. All right, we are going to come back from our break. And so the next topic that we have here is revisiting our tax stabilization policy. So we have a draft that we have for consideration. I'm going to turn it over to you, Bill, to introduce this or talk through it, or, yeah, cool.
Over the last year, one of our lists on our strategic plan was to revisit our tax stabilization policy. As you noticed, the last couple of meetings, we're hitting some of these finish-up items. And certainly we've had a couple of applications which had some good conversation, which helped inform what people thought were important or concerns about the policy. Tried to give you the history of its approval and support and the statute that's behind it, examples of some of the awards. And then I drafted a policy with help from Laura from MDC and also the comments that you all made at council meetings. I certainly don't expect that you're going to adopt it as is, considering some of them say, should we define this better and those kind of things. But wanted to get a sense of what you liked about it, what you don't like about it, what really, if we're going to continue a tax incentive, it really should be to reward what we want to reward. And I think, looking back in the history of that, and particularly when you see the sort of pre-2003, I mean, the city's sole goal at that point was just to expand the grand list and add jobs, period. And so that's what it was used for. After 2003, of course, the state law changed, which took away the ability to stabilize school taxes. And even though it went up to a 50% for 10 years as opposed to 33% for 7 years, it was still a lot less money for people. So it's really been used a lot more sparingly in that time until, ironically, it's just we've had 2 or 3 the last couple of years, but that's been the exception rather than the rule. But nonetheless, I think it's been kind of on our radar to try to update this anyway. It's been since 2003. And so basically get a sense of what's important amongst, I'm not going to read through everything that we changed. I think what I tried to do to at least lay out was, first of all, make clear that this also involves commercial housing. The language said industrial or commercial properties, and under the definition of commercial properties includes commercial housing, but I don't think it was clear that people could do this. So people building new commercial housing or renovating commercial housing would be eligible for that. So we want to make sure that, given our emphasis on housing, obviously we talked about jobs, and I added in the environmentally responsible department. So just tried to make those things clear as we went down through. Tried to simplify the awards. We used to have this huge smorgasbord of awards, and really all everybody ever wants is yeah, I mean, it's just people always want the best one at every level, so let's just call it what it is. And then tried to add in, and these numbers were just ones I picked, but just to add in specific, that the creation or renovation of commercial housing units. It struck me after the last meeting that we were talking a lot about the condition of housing and should we have housing inspections and all that. It's like, well, why not create an incentive for people who, redo an apartment building and make it safer and better and those kinds of things, and so make it easier for people to do that. Tried to define a couple things. There are clearly some areas that need further development, and that was it. One of the issues that had come up was, what are good jobs? Like, what's the job standard? And it had talked about the state's, livable wage. And so one idea, and I talked with a couple of you after the last meeting, was, all right, well, if we don't like what the state says is a livable wage, we ought to at least hold ourselves accountable. We do have the livable wage policies, but that whatever our sort of lowest full-time wage, we obviously must consider that sufficient to work in Montpelier. And so that would be the standard by which somebody had to meet or exceed. And that if there were no benefits, then we would add basically the benefit cost to that, so that it was equivalent. And then that would be changed each year. We would just publish this is what the city wage is for January 1 for this coming calendar year, and that would be what people have to meet. And that's something we can control. If we want to increase that wage, that's something we would do for our own employees, and then would set the standard for other people. And then I just listed things under the top level, but again, those could go wherever you want them to, that had been mentioned in this room as areas people wanted to see. So energy efficiency, historic preservation. I thought it might make sense to create an even better, you can reach one level with one level of jobs, and a separate level if you have either more jobs or jobs that pay above, a premium above the city wage, so to speak, and then, of course, additional housing units. And the rest was mostly, I think, cleanup as far as language. So, those were the general thoughts I had, and hopefully were reflecting thoughts that you had. And from that, where do you want to go?
Connor, and then Ashley.
Yeah, maybe a couple of the legal beagles can help on this one, but I voted against a couple of these, and sure enough, they actually met the definition on all accounts there. Does the city have any legal liability if we were to refuse one of these, but they met that standard?
It's explicit that it's discretionary.
Okay. So if that's the case, financial benefit to the city, that would be just completely subjective, if you looked at it, or what about okay, so the project would not be in Montpelier without any stabilization. I remember timber homes that came up, and
So we took that.
you just asked them, right? And they said, no, we come here anyway, so Dean said match in your mind, but how do you prove that?
So I actually took that section out.
Oh, you did? Okay, yeah.
Because we've struggled with that every time. And I think part of that has been our own other requirements. So we required people to have their permits in hand prior to seeking tax stabilization. And that's for a big commercial project, that means there's some engineering design, there's, architectural design. You've got to go through your permitting process, bring your experts. You've already got a fair amount of cost in. You've probably acquired the land or have lease on the land. You've made a commitment. So to go through all that effort and then say, well, we wouldn't come here, especially just for the municipal tax, it was a stretch. So I think if we're going to require that level of preparation, I don't think it's just not a fair question. On the other hand, I suppose you could reverse it and say, prior to seeking your permits, you come in and say, here's my concept, here's my budget so far, and I can't really go forward with this. That might be another way to do that, and then we could make that determination at that level before they go down the road. And my thinking was, and again, doesn't mean it's the right thinking, was if we're going to sort of have them already go through their permits and come in, then what are we getting? And so really hit the renovation of apartments and reward the behaviors that we want to see, as opposed to just, you're coming in. But we also want to see grand list, when you go back to the Economic Development Strategic Plan, for instance, one of the things that it called out was that there had only been an increase of 10 private sector jobs in Montpelier over, I think, the last decade. And that was, called out. We've had public sector jobs. Just this last one that we approved is 50 private sector jobs coming into one project. So in terms of at least that goal, that was one that was being met. Now, if that's not as much of a goal for us, then here's our chance to put our money where our mouth is.
Ashley.
I have a long list of thoughts. So one thing, I appreciate that MDC was involved in this, but I'm hoping for a more robust group of people at the table to come up with a plan like this, because tax abatements mean that residents are supporting the infrastructure bill, for example, when projects are coming in that are going to have people driving through Montpelier. There's going to need to be improvements made to other areas, other things in our community that these businesses need to be here. And that means residents are, in essence, paying that. So I would love to see more people at that conversation table than just the sort of economic side of things. And, I think there need to be like residents there. There just need to be a lot more perspectives at the table when we sort of talk about how this policy can be redesigned. So another piece that I don't see in here, and I don't know what the appetite is, but I know, for example, with Caledonia Spirits, there was an infrastructure piece that the city invested in, and there was tax abatement as well. And to me, the infrastructure upgrades are pretty significant in terms of the benefit that every person can derive from that, right? Because if you're building out sewer and you're building out access to city water and things like that, that sort of opens up other development possibilities. But I really struggle with the notion of doing both infrastructure upgrades and tax abatement. I would love to see some election, like the city, can approve up to X amount in infrastructure, if there's a problematic intersection or we need to build a sidewalk or whatever, then, the city is willing to sort of put in that, but is not going to abate any sort of taxes or some hybrid formula wherein the maximum sort of city investment, and I consider an abatement an investment because it's revenue that we're losing. I would like to see some sort of further development of what those options are, because if we're going to spend $10,000 on infrastructure upgrade and we're abating taxes for, I don't recall off the top of my head, but that's a pretty significant investment for the city, which translates directly to all of us are paying for that. And it's something that will certainly bring other people in, but that's going to be wear and tear on the roads and increased traffic in certain neighborhoods. And so I love that we clarified that commercial housing is included in part of this. What I don't see in here, though, are any protections for renters in that. So it's great that commercial housing exists. I think it's one way that folks like myself, not here in Montpelier, because I have been incredibly lucky that I have a great place to live now, but okay, that's great. So we want to encourage and incentivize people to maintain their properties well, but how do we make that affordable still? So, you go in and you make, I think one of the tiers was $350,000 in either renovations or new construction. But then if you're going to turn around and charge, $2,500 a month in rent, you're certainly creating units and making them accessible to some people, but I don't know that really furthers our goal of actually making Montpelier reflect our shared values.
Can I just interrupt on that, just to be clear? It's $350,000 of an investment or renovation or creation of 4 more commercial units. It doesn't mean you have to spend $350,000 on those units.
Right. Well, but either way, so if we're abating taxes and the rent there is like so completely out of reach for the sort of median renter demographic, that's not something that I have any interest in putting taxpayer money towards.
So can I play devil's advocate on that? Because if somebody renovates, we want people to renovate their properties or build new housing. And the cost of that's going to get passed along to tenants under any circumstances.
That is true.
So the disincentive would be to just leave them the way they are and keep the rents down. In this case, at the very least, if they have reduced taxes, that savings could be passed along to the tenants from the improvements of their properties.
Well, that assumes a degree of altruism that
I'm
I
just
don't
saying
know.
that we could not include housing as an incentive. I don't know. Maybe there's another way. Maybe there's rental subsidies or something else we could do. I don't know how
I think it would be that rent would not exceed whatever the median rent plus X percent or something. I feel like if we are going to incentivize that kind of development, we should be incentivizing that, but we can't be incentivizing that at the price of pricing out the people who are already living here, because if you renovate and you invest $350,000 or you whatever
number,
you meet your threshold dollar amount wise, and then I get my offer to renew my lease for the next year, and my rent's going to go up $700 a month because, well, now the apartment will command that, I can't stay. So I want to be mindful that incentivizing on the one end often translates to significant disruption on the other.
So I guess I'd just push back again and say, I think you need to, so it's the difference between the current value and the new value. And the municipal tax on that. So, is the savings on the taxes enough that's going to create the difference between how much, I think it might incentivize someone, but does it, if they improve it $700,000, they're going to save whatever they save. It's the investment in the property that's going to drive the rent, not the taxes. I mean, I think.
But they're getting other taxpayer money, and then they're pricing out renters who have been established there.
So that goes to the question of, is there a public interest in having people improve their properties then if it's going to drive rents up?
Well, I think the answer is yes, but we as a city have the ability to incentivize the kind of development that we are looking for, which is the kind of development that makes our units habitable, but that also does not further marginalize communities that have been historically marginalized in Montpelier anyway. So,
Other things on your list?
yeah, a bunch
Okay.
of them.
Okay.
And I'm not sure what the best way to do. I also went sort of section by section with suggestions, so I don't know.
Yes, Jack.
I have a
and
direct
then
response, a couple of direct responses to what she
Sure.
was just saying,
Go
so this
for it.
might be a good time for that. With the housing, I was very pleased to see the housing in there. I think things we can do to encourage housing development are good. It's already a tiered structure, and I can imagine adjusting it so that you get one level of abatement for housing, because I think we've seen some new rental housing that rents out at pretty high rents, and yet I think we would agree are beneficial to the city to have the new housing. And I think that we could set it up so in order to qualify for the higher tier of benefits, you need to satisfy some kind of rent affordability test. Similarly, if the housing that we're looking at is improvements or renovations rather than new development, I could see us having a condition of rent stabilization or non-displacement for a number of years, the way that the weatherization program, for instance, says that you can't get all this weatherization money and then kick the people out who are there. So I think there are ways to address some of these concerns.
just while we're not interrupted, but pause here. Any other thoughts on housing? No? Okay. Back to Ashley.
So let's see. I'm also, I am really struggling with the notion that you apply once for something and can get a maximum possible 10 years. That just seems like an incredibly long time with, zero oversight. So I think that's just sort of a more general point. So now, let's see. So, one I thought was fine. There were, so in number 2, in the conditions, let's see. So I'm also wondering, I think it was 2G. Let's see. Any awards will be made for the entire application. It's that last sentence. I'm not fond of always and never. I think those are always the wrong answer. So we see what we were trying to get at, which is basically assurances that if there is an approval for one, the approval will be for the other. But I also struggle to, I mean, I can foresee a set of circumstances where people have an application for one that meets the guidelines, but the other one doesn't meet it. And I'm not going to be in a position where I support one aspect, but the other isn't met, but it says any awards will be made for the entire application.
So we might be able to just word that differently. My goal wasn't really that. My goal there was that you don't get to get your building approved and then come in the next year and say, oh, by the way, we now want our personal property. We forgot to ask for that.
Okay, that makes way more
so that
sense
you're
then.
basically you've got to ask for it all when you come in, and that so that it would be, and that you can't ask for business personal property unless you're also asking for a new building.
Okay.
So you can't. So some.
That makes way more
although,
sense.
I suppose if somebody renovated a building and then came in and said, well, then they could ask for
would
they could
still
ask for the renovations, but they were bringing on all new personal property. I was really thinking more of you just have a business, they do all put in a whole new personal property, come and say, now we want tax stabilization on it. We wanted to see a bigger investment than that. So I was just trying to basically say you've got to put it all in one package. So
that makes way more sense to me than how I interpreted that. Right, and in essence, that sort of precludes people from getting the second bite at the proverbial apple. With regard to findings of fact is page 2, number 7. Before approving a tax stabilization contract, the City Council shall make specific findings of fact on which to base the general findings that the project meets. I think we need much more clear guidelines about like what exactly it is, because I think every time this has come up, there have been questions about what kind of jobs, how much are they paying, how are we defining this? And that seems to be a bit too subjective for me. If we as a city are going to continue to have any sort of tax incentive like this, I think that we have an obligation to be very clear in what our expectations are, and part of that to me is also being transparent with residents about what it is that we are all paying taxes for. And so, to be sort of told that a request about what the wages look like or what tier the jobs are in is intrusive. I mean, frankly, I think we have a right to know what kinds of economic development we are supporting, because I'm not super interested in supporting, jobs that don't pay enough for someone to work full time and support a family. I would say that those findings of fact, we need to do some work on that section and really articulate. Maybe we need a definition section to sort of clearly, articulate terms of art that we use. And I think that was even mentioned later on in this document.
I think we could, maybe not necessarily in the findings of fact section, but under the certain criteria, like the jobs, I think is probably the most difficult one.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of them, the grand list, we can pretty easily ascertain, and the number of housing units, those are pretty simple.
Right.
We could simply say we could put in a criteria for documentation that we require. I agree with you that if people are using that as a means for asking for tax break, they ought to be forthcoming, even if it's presented as a confidential document that isn't
Sure.
for public release, but that at least the council can be, So I think
Yeah.
that might be the way to do it. As we could say, so many jobs at this rate, as documented by.
Right, and I think that's the other piece too for me, and I'm not sure if that's sort of like the spillage over of being a lawyer, where I'm like, prove it. I mean, because words are great, but I want to see like what exactly it is that we are supporting, and if we're supporting, well, my laundry list of things that I'm not super interested in supporting. Okay, so the next thing that I really struggled with, I have no idea what other people's thoughts are about this, but the award amounts to me, I don't know what this looks like. This is not my I mean, policy-wise, I have ideas about this, but in terms of like economic whatever, I don't love that it's basically up to 50% of the value of that piece of property because, you know, when we were doing our budget numbers, you know, we were debating, you know, the addition of a $40,000 this or a $60,000 this or a $90,000 this. And to me, this sort of benefit is to a business is a benefit not realized to community investment. Like, this is a sense of community investment, but this isn't going to put in a sidewalk because we're not getting that entire tax payment. And so one thing that I had sort of thought about, and I don't know how to phrase it, so I couldn't really come up with anything super helpful on Google either. But looking at what our total grand list is and then pegging the maximum possible tax abatement award for all projects at a percentage, so, you know, I'm just going to use simple numbers because math is not my best thing. So let's say we had $1 million. I know our grand list is much bigger than that, but if we had $1 million and we said that we would we would not abate any more taxes than, you know, 1%. I'm still not even confident I can do the math on that. But what, 100,000? Is that right? Am I right? Yes? No? Maybe? I don't know. Is that right?
1%?
No, so it'd be a $10,000.
$10,000.
$10,000. All right, look at that. Well, it's a good thing I can laugh at myself. You know, and so however it is that we decide to do it, but if we sort of peg it to a percentage for a year, then we as a council are also going to have to be a little bit more mindful about how we are going to allocate these projects. We that was the answer that we gave. Was it the community fund when they came in last year? Like there were bigger asks, and we just said, you know, we don't really have the money to do that because this is what we allocated. And I know that that's a different. It's not really apples to apples, but I think the concept is, you know, we agree that as a community, this percentage of our grand list is what, you know, and there's obviously going to be an increase because there will be new taxes paid, just not all of them. You know, that might be one way to sort of tackle this from a different, you know, instead of, you know, every person that applies for it can apply for up to the maximum, you know, 10 years at 50%. Just some sort of like benchmark for this is what we are willing to forgive this fiscal year, and this is what the impact looks like going forward for that, so that we can sort of keep that rolling tally close to if we decide to set a limit.
I'm going to pause here.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that we're going sort of linearly through this, but I just want to check in with the rest of the council. Any comments on any of the sections that been talked about so far? Yeah, Donna, do you have?
She's covered a lot. At one point, I thought you were at section 8, benefit levels, and you talked about
Yes.
years. I did have a concern about years and wondered where the 3, 5, 10 came from. That would be helpful.
So the 10 years is the maximum allowed by law and has been approved by our voters. So 50% in 10 years has been locally approved. The prior level had been 1/3 for 7 years. That had been the previous limit, so that seemed like another landmark to use. So basically, these were taken from the last policy, which just had all those different levels, and I just took the top level. So we had set 1/3 for 3 years as the lowest one, then 1/3 for 7 years, then 1/2 for 7 years, and then 1/2 for 10 years. So there was just a gradually increasing amount if the more they provide. So that's where, I mean, there's no magic to these other than that's based on what we did in 2003.
Well, and maybe, Laura, you could chime in. I'd like, you know, businesses per se, you look at anything new, a new project, new business, at least 5 years to level off. So I wondered if infrastructure-wise at 10 years was a magic number or something, because I'm uncomfortable with that long, and I just wanted to understand why.
Sure.
So to that point, the 5 years, it depends on the holding period for a development. In Montpelier, we tend to have longer holding periods for.
Could you define that, please?
So that's the time that a building is built, and that developer holds on to the building and leases it out. We're kind of unique that we have a lot of developers that continue to own their buildings, so their hold period is much longer. So 10 years, they're calculating, is it 10 years, 15 years, plus that I'm looking to make that money back or kind of get even, like get to stabilization basically. So Montpelier's a little bit unique that longer time frame. That also allows developers to invest a little bit more and be a little more, I don't know what the right term is. Yeah, I'm not sure how to explain that, but actually the 10 years is realistic for a hold period, if not longer, in our market, so that would be beneficial.
So part of that question was, within our own strategic plan, and we were compared to Waterbury and Northfield, does that 10-year, 5-year, I mean, what's the regional sort of time period?
That I'm not sure, and it really depends on who the players are, and who's operating and developing in those different communities. So when we're looking at the level of how we compete with Barry or Waterbury, I don't know on that level of granularity.
I think it's also important to add in here when we're talking about that. One of the reasons why this has been in place for so long, and I think been supported, is that our property taxes here are significantly higher than some of our neighbors, particularly Berlin. Barry's municipal taxes rates are higher than ours, but I don't know about their property values. And so part of this was, as we compete for places, we could still end up with the same infrastructure demand if people are, located right over the town line and still driving on our roads to get to and from it without us getting any of the tax benefits. So how do we create an incentive for somebody to locate in Montpelier and make that investment here and at least help equalize? I know with Caledonia Spirits, it was a huge issue for them because they were looking all over and they just said, your difference in taxes is really a financial killer for us, and so how could we make that so that they could come in? And so, just to give you an order of magnitude, talking about what Ashley was talking about, $1 million increase to the grand list would be about a $25,000 annual tax rate. So there would be a $12,500 tax cut, but it would also be $12,500 new money to the tax bill. So that's the order of magnitude, and that's really the range. And so anything under that is less than that. So that's the amount of money per the application we're sort of talking about. We're not, none of these are sort of $100,000 tax cuts. They're much lower than that.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Other comments on or questions on anything up to Section 8?
I should say I do, but I think I'd rather just let Ashley keep rolling for now. My question is a little bit more general.
I'm not trying to steamroll.
No,
I think you're doing great.
I just figured it'd be good to check in.
I saw you.
Yeah, go ahead. Now's okay.
So I had a comment that had to do with the criteria for getting tax abatement for bringing jobs to Montpelier. And so it was prompted by seeing the recent proposal of the one that you approved for the project that went to Farm Home Way. And I wondered, well, what was the benefit of having workers there? They're not downtown going to restaurants. They're not buying things. They don't walk around our core downtown. So I wondered if you wanted to think about the definition of, does a business just have to come anywhere in Montpelier, or should it come to the core downtown? Because what's the real point of giving this abatement? And then the other thought I had about that is that was moving jobs from Berlin to Montpelier. So it wasn't bringing workers from New Jersey to Montpelier. The people weren't going to move. It's not going to change. Those people are probably going to live in the same places. So I was trying to think through, well, what's the point of giving an abatement when the business is already just 8 miles down the road? And I don't totally understand why you would do that, because I am very concerned, as Ashley and Connor have both asked, about are we giving away tax revenue that we could be using for the infrastructure of the city streets and the, all the services that we provide. So I think you want to tighten up things that have to do with the jobs and think about what's the real goal involved in them. So that's my piece of
Thank you.
input.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Ashley.
And to Eve's point, that was the next thing on my list is so jobs coming to Montpelier. So to me, when someone phrases it that way, there's X number of jobs coming to Montpelier, my first thought is not those are new jobs that are created as a result of a business coming to an area. Almost all of these have been jobs that have been transferred from other people. So the representation was that most of their employees would be coming with them. And that's great, but that is not generating additional employment opportunities in Montpelier. It is certainly creating positions that if people vacate, that could be an opening for another person in Montpelier. And so while we get to count those as jobs added in Montpelier, it's not actually an expansion. Like, they're not creating additional positions. They're just taking all of their workers who are working in this building over here and moving them to this building over here. So it's nice to like read that and say, oh, Montpelier added X number of jobs, but those aren't new jobs. Those are existing jobs that are restructuring to Montpelier. The other piece is, and I love that the language about the wages piece is in here. And I would also, in addition to the number of jobs, I think this was in 8A, although it seems to me like maybe some of this stuff is not really in like total order, because see.
I'm not sure what you mean by 8A.
So hold on, it's on typewritten page 3, like the first page 3 after the memo.
Oh, yeah, there's
There's like a repeat, and so I can't tell.
the numbers.
Yeah.
So the criteria for level 2.
Oh,
you're
I
talking-
see. That's
Yeah.
because the next one should be
Yep.
Yeah, it
9.
was
So this
just-
is really section 10.
Oh, that means the rest of my notes might be wrong.
And this is
We'll follow
section
you.
11. Okay.
So I would also like, as part of any requirement for this, is to have a reinvestment in Montpelier plan. Like, what are you going to do for us? Because, okay, you want to relocate here, you're telling us that you're not willing. Well, I mean, one of the criteria had been, like, you wouldn't do this otherwise. That to me seems a bit murky and questionable, and I appreciate that we got a candid answer, which was like, well, we're going to do it anyway, but this.
They took it out.
No, I know, but like, instead of sort of focusing on that piece, like, what are you as a business going to add to Montpelier? Because, I've lived in other places, and, we see box stores going in, and box stores serve a function. It's a practical reality, but I'm not super interested in continuing on a path where we are just doing whatever we can to attract businesses that aren't really adding anything to what we want Montpelier to be. We can bring in CVMC jobs that are coming 8 miles down the road, but we're not bringing in new people living here. Like, it's not adding to anything in our core downtown. Like, what is that adding for people who focus their time, energy, and efforts in this community, which is largely concentrated here?
So I just in thinking about that question, in my interpretation of this, the reinvestment in Montpelier, let's say, is what the criteria are for levels 1 through 4, right? So theoretically, if they can meet some of these criteria, that is how they are giving back. And if we think that this list is not enough, then if you have suggestions as to what they ought to be able to meet, then that's fair. And for example, I mean, like actually to Eve's point about like the location of the jobs, under level 3D, project must be located within the boundaries of the designated downtown or growth center. So that's if we have a goal of growing our downtown, we can build it in right here. Like this is how they're giving back, and so in terms of.
I would just point out that's actually for that they have to meet 2 of those criteria, not so.
Well, so that's okay. I mean, maybe we reframe it as like you have to do all of them. I mean, but then we should probably think pretty hard about like which of those things, we want to require. But maybe it's okay that, they're meeting. The point is like, is this the right list, for that purpose? Because that's really why these criteria are here. And maybe it's like, maybe what you have, or maybe what you're thinking about is like, that we'll build a sidewalk over the next, or we'll pay for a sidewalk over the next 10 years.
So Timber Homes had some definitive things that they were going to do. They were going to clear a portion of the land and put a picnic table out, and then Caledonia Spirits they're creating waterfront access.
Sure.
I mean, those to me are definite public good.
So how do we, maybe that's it's sort of a project by project, what that might look like.
Well, I think they should tell us.
Sure, but maybe in here we could have one of the criteria be, just a little more general. It's like you propose something. You know what I mean?
I mean, and I think that's sometimes how you end up with things that as a city government we wouldn't necessarily think about, because that's not the world that we necessarily operate in.
Lauren?
Yeah, just kind of on this point, I was thinking a lot about, to me, kind of to Ashley's point of, if we're looking at the city budget, where would we put this in our priorities? Like, would this be something that we would just automatically want to always have a certain amount we would dedicate to? And to me, it seems most interesting if we're able to use this as an incentive that's getting developers to think about kind of helping us meet our goals. So, we've talked some about housing as obviously being a big goal. We have a net zero goal. We have other goals that we could think about. So can we be writing this in a way that, somebody can come make the case to us, and even this incentive itself would get them thinking about, here's how I can shape my project in a way that is furthering the goals that we want to meet as a city, and then us being able to gauge, okay, this feels like a good use of taxpayer dollars that we're not getting, because it's actually helping us achieve our goals, and that we're putting I think the more tangible we can be about what that looks like, so that it's like real to the people who are trying to meet it, and for us to be able to assess, is this, some of the language of aesthetics and other things seem more squishy and subjective, whereas, how are you helping us achieve our goals as a community that we have in other places?
So we had a couple of ideas on that actually, that didn't show up here because they came in after I'd already drafted and sent it out. Number one, as far as the location, we can certainly, you could choose to move that up in the to level 1 or 2. I think the other thing, certainly downtown and growth center is clearly important, but we also do have zones for industrial, they've got different names now, but for office parks and those kind of things, it doesn't mean we want to exclude. We have a very, one of the Cabot warehouse out on Gallison Hill Road, that received it, and now it's paying a lot of taxes, and it's being out there, and we've gained the benefit of that, and it could have easily been across the line in Berlin. So we have even, I don't know what the jobs are, but just the actual grand list total was helpful. So if we want industrial development too, because that brings a different types of jobs, that's important. But anyway, to the point about aesthetics, because I agree, I think Glenn and I talked to this too, about how subjective aesthetics are. One idea, and I think this was actually Glenn's, was rather than make it that aesthetic, maybe simply say that they must provide a place for public art through the Public Arts Commission. So whether it's a mural on the wall or space for a statue, and they don't have to actually build it. All they have to do is say, yes, you can put public art on our property that is gone through our Public Arts Commission process. And that would be something they're not required to do, but they could get an incentive. Another one that Mike suggested is, as we develop what we call it, what is it, the open space, the green print and the official map. So we're going to be developing an official map that says, here's where we'd like to have certain easements for trails or whatever, and it basically allows the city to negotiate with a person when they want to sell their property, but we can't require them to give it to us. We talked a lot about that during zoning. You can't make them take it. But as a condition of a tax incentive, we might say, if you have a piece of property that's on our green print, then you can get top benefits if you agree that you'll make that available to the city or sign an option with the city or those kind of things. And, you know, that's not a regulatory, that's an incentive. So, I mean, these are the kinds of things we could build in as well.
Cool. Donna?
Is it possible to have a subcommittee and you all come back with a more clear draft?
Yeah.
Then-
I think our goal today
then-
was to see what was
then go by
important to
line by
people that
line,
you
yeah.
wanted, where people's priorities were as far as building this in.
But I did want to back up what you said, because I do feel like it's great to have businesses downtown, but I think we also have to bring in other kinds of businesses for other kinds of jobs on the outskirts. So I think it has to be balanced, that's all.
I'm sorry, yes, Connor.
Yeah, I think kind of piggybacking off other people, it's this thing could be like 100 pages long, right? Like, we can workshop it to death. And I think it's important to have the baselines, and I'm comforted with the fact I can vote no on any of these with no real repercussions. But like, you know, I think I want to get out of the mindset of like, okay, somebody coming in and saying, check, 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 give me some money, right? And it's kind of what Ashley's saying too. It's like, what are you bringing to the community? You got to be like exceptional to get this. And it could be sort of an intangible thing that we're not even thinking about here, right? If I open up a store and I said like, all right, I'm the only place in town you can buy basketball shoes for your kid, as opposed to going to Walmart up the hill, that would be real value for me in this community, right? I think that's something that we don't have right now that appeals to like working class people, right? So again, I think we could like go into this in great detail. I support the subcommittee idea, but again, yeah, I'll probably vote no on most of these things. And that's okay.
My only concern about that is, you know, people are trying to build their business and, you know, trying to build a business on, you know, the intangibles is that would just be really hard. We'd have to do, you could do it like really early in the process, but just thinking.
I take a little oomph for the presentation.
Takes some
Sell it,
chocolate
yeah.
or something. Okay. Glenn?
So, just because it feels like we may be kicking this to subcommittee shortly,
Yes.
I want to put my 2 cents in with a couple of questions. First, I think one of the concerns that I have about it is that it feels like it is very easily skewed toward larger, more well-established businesses now, and I'm curious about how we can look at changing that. So, for instance, or at least why, if that skew exists, which it appears to me, and then why it might. So, for instance, the first criterion for level 1 is basically a threshold, a money threshold for application. And I'd like to hear an argument for why that threshold exists. Why should we be looking for only projects beyond a certain dollar value on this?
So I think the reason for that was, you know, because the city does gain the other half. That if there wasn't a significant sort of new revenue, why would we create an incentive just for some small increment of, you know, if, as we said, $1 million property is only $12,000 break to them and $12,000 increase to us. You know, $100,000 property is going to be $1,200. So if we're only gaining $2,400 or $1,200 out of this, why would we? So I think it was strictly a financial consideration. I think if you were to maybe take that out for a certain number of jobs, or like, that's why I took the money away just for housing units, to say, if you just create housing units, you're eligible regardless of how much you're spending, because that's something we want. And so I think we could put that in, but I think the dollar amounts are strictly to make it worth the city's while to get the money coming in.
Yeah, and I think I understand that, and I do appreciate the kind of lower threshold for things like housing, or the different threshold. I guess even so, feels to me like an incremental good is still a good, and so if we get a whole pile of small good projects, that's good, and we might want to encourage that.
So I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. I'm saying that's why it was like this. I mean, this is your policy, and we could do whatever we want with that.
Okay.
But then you might be getting a lot more applications that Connor has to vote no on.
Right, and when I put this question to my partner Kate, she said basically that you might just get buried in tiny little applications, and I'm curious whether that would really happen if we took out the threshold entirely, I guess, if anyone has any kind of prediction on that.
Jack?
I have a couple of thoughts. One of them is more general, and one of them is more specific. Whenever we do a tax stabilization contract, it is a tax expenditure. We are foregoing revenue. I know it is very difficult to measure or to enforce the but-for test. But I'm just concerned if we don't have the but-for test, I think it takes we should have some real discussion about, well, if we're not doing the but-for test, why are we making the tax expenditure at all? If we think that if we think this tax expenditure is not bringing the investment to the city, then, because that seems to me like that's what eliminating the but-for test means, then I think we just need to discuss that.
Sure.
And then the other thing, which is a more fine-grained observation, when we look at the city wage and we have a differential depending on whether the job includes benefits or not, I think we need to have more specificity about what it means to say the job has benefits with it.
Great. Connor, then Glenn, then Steve.
Quick question, how much does the lowest, I don't know if I want to ask this, how much does the lowest paid city worker make?
I had that info, and I'll get it for you.
Okay, Glenn.
All right. Next question I think might be easy to answer, and might be, I don't know. This only applies to commercial development, and that also seems like it's not entirely clear to me why that's necessary. If I buy some land and build a house on it, that's good for the city and
So
should be encouraged.
I have
to
a
build.
very easy
Yes,
answer to
I
that.
thought you might. The state doesn't allow us to do it, right?
Right.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that was it.
Okay. Do you have that, if you're still looking?
Oh, I'm looking that
For
up, but I mean, the
Connor's-
statute is right in there.
Yeah,
that-
okay.
I'll get that.
I tried to read that and didn't quite understand it. And the final question I have, I think, is still for Bill, so I'm just going to pile more questions on. Wanted to follow up on one of Ashley's points about oversight over the length of the term. Say it's 50% for 10 years. I feel like I read somewhere in there that we do check to make sure that, for example, the jobs still exist. And I'd like to hear just a little bit about that.
So they're required to do an annual report, and we, through the assessor, will do spot checks and confirm with them and make them at the very least sign a document that they're doing that. And we obviously check to see, what's the most of the criteria is either the jobs or the grand list value for the most part, and at least under the current policy. So we know that. We know that the grand list value has maintained. But if there were other conditions, like putting in a boat ramp or something like that, we make sure that those conditions are still being met, and that, because it is a contract, it's not a, and we have, I think there's something in there about the ability to,
I'm hoping to get to Steve here.
Is he gonna find that lowest paid city employee?
Yep, working on it. Almost there. So our lowest full-time rate is $15.40 with the 45% benefit. So it's a couple dollars higher than the state livable wage.
Okay.
So I apologize for Steve Whitaker, not having these thoughts as well organized. I'm no expert in tax stabilization, but I want to just make some observations. We recently witnessed the kind of race to the bottom with the Amazon second headquarters. We've heard the phrase privatize the profits, socialize the costs. We may be trying to contort ourselves into such a potentially advantageous to the wealthy who can afford to develop, that we are selling all the rest of our citizens short. This may not really be worth pursuing beyond what we've already done. I just, the example, on the other side, the example of why would you go out of your way for $12,000? You know, because your kid can get basketball shoes locally, right? I can't buy a men's shirt in this town. You know, there are disadvantages to, but the idea that those who can afford to game the system and apply, who can apply a staff to apply for these stabilizations, that really is not a finger on the scale. It's a foot on the scale, and maybe we need to keep it very simple. That if you want to contribute and join into this community and build it, pony up, and the benefits will apply equally to everybody. But this idea of giving 10 years of 50% off your taxes is not something that the poor people and the renters who are paying the taxes for the landlords are going to agree with. So you're making decisions on behalf of people who aren't as well off as yourselves. So I would caution that this may be a slippery slope that advantages the already advantaged at the expense of those who aren't.
Thank you. Laura, did you want to say something?
So, Laura Gebhardt, Montpelier Development Corporation. I quick wanted to reply to Steve's comments. Thank you. And just kind of put it into context, the development opportunities in Montpelier. We don't have a lot of sites to be able to attract this, the big fish. So in no way do I see this tax stabilization as an incentive that's really for some, big business that really doesn't fit into Montpelier anyway. So I do want to frame that the tax stabilization is helping to incentivize something that you all want to see happen, whether it is efficient buildings or good jobs or growing the grand list. We're not at the scale of some of these other communities who are doling out really big incentives. And I'm very conscious of that from the economic development perspective. Few things. So I wanted to read something from Shannon McIntyre and Timo Bradley. They weren't able to make it tonight, but they're from Timber Homes. So they just wanted to share their perspective from the tax stabilization policy, just to give you some context there. So our business, Timber Homes Vermont, recently opened our shop doors on Elm Street in Montpelier. We've been operating out of a wall tent in Middlesex for 6 years and slowly growing the business. When the perfect piece of land for our shop came up for sale, we felt ready to move forward with buying and building in Montpelier, even though it felt like a colossal financial leap. The number of employees and the level of production had outgrown the wall tent, and we wanted to be a more visible part of the community we all live in. We made this move carefully with our eyes wide open to the fact that to build the facility we'd need, we'd be taking on significant loan payments for 30 years to come and a much higher tax bill. These factors push our business into a position of needing to meet certain yearly revenue and needing a certain number of employees to do so. Needless to say, this has been an exciting and stressful year for our company as we grow into our new size, our new financial demands, and our new digs. I understand the perspective of some who feel it's not the city's job to give a tax break to businesses, so I'd like to share what the tax break meant for Timber Homes. For us, getting approved for tax stabilization has felt like a sign of welcome. The city stretching out its hand to shake ours as we venture forward saying, quote, "I see your challenges and I want to support you specifically during your transition." If we continue on track this year, we will break even in 2019 as we spend resources finishing up our new shop. For our particular case, as a worker-owned cooperative, we intend that our business will outlast its current ownership, and the city is therefore all but guaranteed a significant amount of tax revenue from Timber Homes long into the future. The tax stabilization that we received is a generous gesture from the city and also a drop in the bucket in terms of what we will need to spend this year to be in operation. I say this to point out that we are not getting a free ride by any means, and that in practice, the money we saved allowed us to reallocate funds towards training new employees we just hired. As a resident of Montpelier, I would personally support moving to add additional requirements to being approved, including living wages for employees and energy efficiency standards. It's important to me as a member of this community that this program be targeted at businesses that have a positive impact on Montpelier's residents and our footprint. Tax stabilization is a valuable tool for the city to welcome new businesses, and with a few tweaks could be a well-targeted incentive. So that's from Shannon. The other thing I just wanted to provide you all with, so I did a really quick development pro forma. And so sorry if this is confusing. I try to simplify it a bit and just kind of give the perspective of what a developer is going through from the cost and revenue perspective of any development project. And especially in Montpelier's market, the numbers are really tight. And so with this pro forma, I got creative and did a 3-story mixed-use building, presumably in the downtown, about 13,500 square feet, 4,500 square feet for each level. And with that, there's only a certain amount that you can actually lease out, so the other parts are for bathroom or hallway and kind of those unusable areas. So when I applied the very average rents, this is assuming that these are average quality spaces. Apartments on the 3rd floor, $20 per square foot. Office on the 2nd floor, $18 per square foot. Retail on the bottom floor, $22 per square foot. So very average for our market. You can go a little lower, you can go a little bit higher, but that's pretty much the average. You work in operating expenses, and per year, that net operating income, some of them got a little blurry, but it's $131,000 about for the cost to operate each year. Or sorry, the revenues each year. When you look to the other side and look at the development costs, it costs approximately $150 per square foot to build new in Montpelier. And this is where we start to see the numbers get really close, where the cost to build is pretty similar all across Vermont, but when you go to some place like Burlington, you're able to acquire much higher rents. And so this is where we are really tight in our market to making those numbers work. And then I got to the end, and with a project for you to have the green light to even move forward and start applying for permits, you want a net operating income that's higher than your total cost of capital. If that didn't happen, and before I left the office, I was fiddling with the numbers. I jacked up the rent prices. I really lowered the interest rate on the loan, and I was going all over the place, and I still couldn't get above that threshold of the costs the revenues were higher than the costs. And so I didn't do a great job of that, but it's showing you like it's really hard to make a project work, any sort of development project. And so, and to have rates that actually work within our market, that people are going to pay to open up their shop or to have to, you know, open up a new office. So when we talk about, you know, new businesses that want to open up and try their concept, it's really tough to enter into a building with $22 per square foot into a first floor retail space. So that's where it gets a little challenging for developers to build and to get the return. There's a certain rent that they have to hit, and yet, so all to say, it's really tough to make the numbers work in this community. So any little bit helps, especially if we want to build in our downtown, if we want to redevelop brownfield sites, like that just continues to add to the cost. So you have the soft costs, which are architectural designs, engineering drawings, and add into that any infrastructure improvements that they're paying for themselves. It starts to climb. And so I just wanted to put it into context. People aren't getting rich off of these developments. It's a really tight margin for any and all in this city. So just to, again, put that into context.
So I'm anticipating, team, that we have a lot more work to do on this, conversation to be had, and we did just talk about having some kind of a working group meeting to talk further about this. So does that sound okay to the group? I'm seeing a lot of nods, just in
Do you
general.
want council members?
So
it's a subcommittee. I assume that meant council subcommittee.
I had assumed a council subcommittee, but I think we should, to Ashley's point about, having a broad set of stakeholders, I think we could, it's obviously going to be a public meeting, but sort of be intentional about making certain, voices are at the table. But
I guess my suggestion would be have a small councils group and, some staff people to flesh out the ideas and then hold a public hearing or reach out to different groups because,
okay,
it's
yeah,
sort of-
sure. So
And
okay.
it has
Okay.
been, voted on 3 times.
So thinking like maybe a group of 3 counselors, max?
Nominate Ashley, Jack, and Glenn.
Well, I was going to also jump in there. I'm sort of interested in this, but unless you.
can take my seat.
Ashley, are you interested? Yeah. Okay. Glenn? Okay. If that's okay, Jack. Okay.
Ashley.
Let me know if you have thoughts to add. Okay. Great. So we'll find some time. Oh, Lauren? Yep.
I was just going to say, this is something that I think I'd be interested to bring to the social and economic justice group and get their thoughts. And I think a lot of this conversation fits into how are we, positioning this within all of our priorities and how is this dealing with equity and other issues. So I will do that as that's kind of happening on a
Awesome.
parallel track.
Great.
And,
Thank
and
you.
any suggestions that people have about priorities or your ideas, please send them to me, and then we'll work that through the committee. And I'll just note one last comment from me, at least, is you're talking about the impact on the community. I just note one last comment from me, at least. You're talking about the impact on the community. Some of Steve's comments. This has been in place since 1980, and we've done it. And in the first, from 1980 to 2003, we had 26 of these, and some of them weren't large. And to be clear, if you're looking at estimated amount of the contract, that's the grand list amount. That's not the dollars, tax dollars. So just in case there's any confusion about that. So no one got a $2 million tax cut. It was only their taxable value. Since then, there's only been 5. So it's not like this is something that happens a lot, and particularly that it really tracks with the change that we couldn't do the school tax. And so I think, it is people, the pro forma that Laura shared is very comparable to many conversations I've had with people about doing projects in town. And so, this isn't something we do a lot of, although hopefully if we have more development, we will.
Jack.
2 quick observations. One, looking at particularly some of the considerations that the draft adds. I think there are city committees that whose work is relevant to that. Housing Task Force, there's some energy stuff in there, and so asking those relevant committees to look at it, I think would also be useful. I also think that as a factual, I think this point will be lost if I don't mention it now, which is that with the abatement or tax stabilization agreement we just did for the CVH project, I believe that at least some of those jobs are not jobs transferred from Berlin or Barry to here. They're new jobs because some of those jobs are for their EPIC Center, which is a new software package that they're rolling out, and it's training and installation and implementation of their new software program. So I think at least some of those are going to be new hires who would have been somewhere else if they didn't go to Montpelier.
I just want to revise my previous offer. I think I've, in the last 30 seconds, realized that I actually don't have time. So if Jack, if you are still willing to be on it.
Hey, Jack, you can make sure you reach out to all those groups.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm out. Just making sure we're clear. Ashley, did you have something more?
I appreciate that this has been in place since 1980, but I can look at lots of policies that have been in place for a really long time, and I don't find the fact that something has existed for a very long time as a reason to continue to perpetuate it. Like I think it's a conversation that the city needs to have, and I think it's also fair that it may be the kind of thing where people are like, we don't want to do this anymore. I mean, and I'm not saying that's anything that I've proposed. I've proposed scaling it back significantly, but I want to make clear that for me, simply because something has existed for a significant period of time does not make it something that is something that needs to continue to perpetuate itself.
And to be clear, my comment about that was not right. Just because we did something before doesn't mean we should do it again. It was that it has existed and has not really created financial hardship on the city. And in fact, you can see many successful projects, Hunger Mountain Co-op and other things that are big contributors to the community. That was all I was saying.
Final comment?
Very brief comment. Since you've just formed a new subcommittee, can I request that we allow people to be email notified of those subcommittee meetings so that
Sure, subject to the open meeting law.
and if at the end of the meeting or whatever, I'd like to raise the issue I spoke with you about just because of the Sunday deadline that's coming up.
You'll have to refresh my memory, but okay. I'm sorry.
We're about to have 30 or 40
Oh, yes,
people
yes,
out on
that's
the
right.
street,
That's
and
right. That's right.
The Montpelier police interpret a vague section of state law to make it illegal for those people who are about to be out on the street.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on. So, do we know who's calling that meeting, by the way, of the subcommittee? You'll do, okay. Great. All right, so moving on. So we're on to a discussion about the rec building. Sue.
Sue Allen, I'm the Assistant City Manager. And just briefly, I'll remind you that you had several meetings ago, a really robust, great conversation about how to proceed with the rec center. And went around the room and informally voiced support, no formal vote on, rather than building a new rec center with pools, to focus for now on the existing rec center and try to get a handle on the costs and what it might look like to improve that building. And there wasn't really a consensus, I guess, at that meeting about how to proceed. So I'm trying to get a little more direction from the council specifically on how to proceed. The proposal that I've put forward, and it's up for discussion, and if you'd like to change it, would be to contract with an architect to walk through the existing building and work with the senior center, the existing building, and the consultant to come back to you with a range from basically just getting the building up to code, getting it safe and slightly more usable, the bare minimum, to making it a sort of a premier rec center. And what would be involved in the costs, the layout. This would not be a final architectural design. It would be just a quick look to give you a better sense of what your options are so that the council can make a smarter decision going forward.
Comments? Head Donna?
I guess I wanted to go to the next step sooner. That I thought when we got the proposal, and I'm sorry, I don't remember those numbers, I was really hoping not to have to shell out another $10,000 to do the minimum when we did some of the minimums before and got estimates. I'd really like us to be a little bolder and move forward, but maybe we can't. Maybe we can't go to the architect and actually get a design until we do this step. Is that what you're telling me? It just seems that we've already done the minimum.
Is that, would you say that's true? Have we done the minimum sort of evaluation at this point?
Well, we know what the cost of putting in an elevator would be. The guesstimate somewhere around $350,000, but also to do the minimum, we'd have to redo bathrooms and redo stairs. We'd have to go down into the basement and figure out, is there lead in the building, all of that. So we're not 100% sure. The consultant guesstimated around 1 to 2 million, but he said right up front, he's not an expert, which is why we would bring in an architect who is an expert to figure out what the cost of that would be. Versus going all out and I'm guessing that you would like first a breakdown on what it would cost to do the full, again, the architect guesstimated it would be about $5 million to do a total overhaul of the building. The consultant did, but he said it's not his specialty, so that, I would think you might want a slightly better nailed down estimate going forward.
I mean, my ideal situation is that there would be some options even in between, right? So
Yeah.
we know what the minimum would be, and what perhaps the premium, the luxury option would be. But knowing that there's probably some steps in the middle, if we wanted to refurbish the basement, or if that was something that we could isolate as a cost, or just the bathrooms, like that, sort of as you're saying. But I'm not sure what the different elements would be, but I'm sure that this process, my hope anyway, would be that this process would figure that out and be able to assign some costs to that, so we'd have some choices.
I like your point that if within the grand picture, he or she did the projects, so they were self-standing, then we might do some mix and match,
Sure.
But, okay.
Sure.
I sort of, my feeling on this was just that if we're going to go, even if we go forward with we're going to renovate the building, we're going to be asked, well, what would it cost to just do the minimum? And so we might as well have that hard number and be able to present, this is the difference, and this is what we think we're getting for it. And
Will these be
it's an
the hard
informed
numbers?
decision.
Or will we
Well,
have
they'd
to
be
wait
harder than
again
what we have now.
until the architect does
So they're
it?
never hard numbers, really, until you actually design something. I mean, I think this is, people always want to know what the hard numbers are, and we hear this. You don't know the cost. Well, the fact is, you don't really know the cost till you get your bids back. But what you do is, you start with a ballpark estimate, then the architect they'll apply square footage costs, so that'll be a better estimate. Then you move forward into design, and then you have real specific. You're going to have so many inches of this and so many feet of this, and then they put unit costs, and then you've got a much, much better cost. But then you put it out to bid, and it could be high, low, depending on the market. So, I mean, you never know. I mean, we run into this a lot with people sort of, how come you don't know the cost? And like, it's like you do something on your house, and until you get your actual cost, you don't know.
You're right. I'll be good.
I think we could probably use a vote on whether to move forward, or unless Connor, yes.
Oh, I was just gonna.
Oh, go for it. Yeah, you got it.
Yeah, move to approve the proposal to develop cost estimates and design concepts for the renovation of the recreation center.
I'll second.
Further discussion.
I just wanted to raise one question.
Yes, Lauren.
So, having not been here when the decision was made to kind of limit the scope, so I, got the survey in the mail and filled it out diligently, and with a kid, I was like, oh, a pool would be so great, and get that that's not where we're going, but I'm just thinking of public process and knowing how many conversations we're having on Front Porch Forum and other things about public process, and it seems like an opportunity to engage the public and make sure that, I didn't even know that this decision had been made, so there's clearly some room for better communication about how this process is going and ensuring that we're setting up a diligent process for, okay, we get back a menu of ideas, which sounds great, and how are we getting input from people and engaging, especially because this was initiated with a citywide survey, so people were proactively engaged, which is great, but like the follow through on that. So just putting that out there, like I'd love a public engagement plan around this, or / communications plan.
Can you comment on that, Sue? Are we planning to do that? Was that a part of it?
Sure. Well, we can. Then the other thing, just to add to this, is yes. The short answer is yes. We can do a public. We actually sort of did do a public engagement plan. It's kind of hard to get the word out anymore.
But even once it's developed, I mean, it is sort of worth going back, right?
She did the survey, but it doesn't sound like she knew you did public meetings out of
I-
City Hall around that.
Like I even had seen the report, but I didn't know that decision had been made.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
as like
the
a
city council.
relatively
Yeah, it was-
engaged person, I didn't know. So I'm just guessing other people
And
didn't.
I think at least
We
our
do social media, we do press releases and press reports.
I think
and
our
we try to get the
interpretation
word
of the
out.
decision too was that the council expressed a preference to look at the Berry Street building, and that we weren't going to spend a lot more money getting final costs on a big building, but we knew it was in the 14 million range, and so we'd at least be able to say, okay, here's the minimum, here's Berry Street, and we know there's some big number out here, and then engage the public on sort of that range of options. I don't think it was that, definitely.
Well, I hear you too, and I mean, we're about to, once we have the choices in front of us, we're gonna absolutely want a lot of input on that. So, I mean, those choices don't even exist yet. So,
Right. Yeah. So yes.
great. Oh, we need to vote. Further discussion. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And the motion carries. Great. So, and I think that is the end of our regular business. We're going to do council reports, all the other reports, and then we do have an executive session, and we will not be coming out from that, right?
Well, we won't be voting.
Well, we won't.
will come out.
We will come out. That's true. Just eternal executive.
It's a hostage
Woo!
situation.
Dun,
You
dun,
thought it
dun.
was a meeting.
Oh dear. Okay, got to keep it together here. Whew, okay. Council reports.
Do you want to go to Steve?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Steve. Yes. Now is great. Thank you.
I recently became aware from folks who are staffing several of the shelters around, and I did some deep research in it, and I spoke to one of the police officers. There's a perception that Section 1106 of Title 19 is a section of statute relating to public highways, right-of-ways, municipally designated areas for camping. And what I learned is that both of the overflow shelters that Good Samaritan runs, that the city relies on, that the population relies on, are closing this weekend for the season. And there's been over 20 people staying at Bethany, and there's at least a dozen staying at Heading. Okay, and anyway, they're all being shut out. The Good Sam's shelter is full at 30, and these people are intending to camp. Some of them already have backup camp ideas out of the park, or you can see some on Route 302 and others. People know where you can see camping. But the idea that we're inadvertently making outlaws out of all these people, just because we haven't really thought through whether or not we want to have a designated area, or whether or not we want to supply a porta potty, or, I know there's going to be pushback from the business community anywhere that you allow those less fortunate to have a minimalist existence, but, it's something that merits attention, and it's urgent, because the idea that we're automatically criminalizing behavior that is not a criminal behavior is troubling to me. And I think government, including specifically this council, need to take a more active role and not rely entirely on the the charity community to handle this. There's bridges to be built between, you know, casual labor jobs in the business community and some of these folks who need to step up. But just even having a lawyer interpret Section 1106 and help us understand what that municipally designated means and whether that applies only to state highways or whether it applies to all municipal, because I don't think it's illegal to be poor. It certainly shouldn't be. So I just call that to your attention, and I think that the sooner you can, I would ask you to appoint a subcommittee to work on this between now and next meeting.
Jack?
Oh, do you have some?
I was just going to respond quickly. To my knowledge, we've never criminalized anybody. We've moved people who want to camp on downtown sidewalks and places, but do people stay in all sorts of places around town? And in fact, our police typically know where they are, check on them at night, make sure they're okay, particularly in cold weather. We'll, in fact, even will give them rides to the shelters if they're available. So I don't think, you know, that we are criminalizing behavior. We do keep them, you know, I think trying to find a balance, as you mentioned, the business community. You know, if someone's camping on a downtown sidewalk, we would probably move them, but there are many places where people stay and we're aware of and have not cited anybody for this. That said, I'm not saying those are the ideal places for people to stay, and we certainly could be looking for better solutions, but I don't think there's, I want to rest everyone, you know, make everyone clear that we're not aggressively seeking to arrest people for being homeless.
I did not mean to suggest that we were aggressively criminalizing people, but in effect, what I've learned from interacting with some of these folks and the managers of the shelters is that these in effect, I think this is even where the zombie movies came from. These are people who, through lack of privacy and lack of basic human support and dignity, are becoming less subhuman and avoided and, you know, cast, and it's not fair or right. And we owe it to ourselves and our own humanity to figure out how to reintegrate these folks.
Jack, did you have anything further?
Well, the problem of homeless people is a serious problem. Last year, this council repealed the ordinance prohibiting begging, and which I think was the right thing to do. This statute, 19 BSA 1106, has been on the books since 1985. I can't imagine that anyone in, certainly Montpelier, and I can't imagine there are many places that are enforcing it, but that doesn't mean that homeless people's needs don't or shouldn't be addressed. I think they need to be, and every night that someone doesn't have a place to live, it's an urgent situation for that person. But something else that we need to address.
Anything further on that?
We've got our priorities retreat coming up.
Yeah.
Might be something to talk about.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Great. Thank you again. Council reports. Who would like to go first? Go ahead, Glenn.
I'll go first, partly just because one of the things I was going to report on was what Stephen just told us, and I got it from him, so thanks for that, Stephen. Otherwise, I want to call folks' attention to the newly installed watercolors in council chambers.
Yay.
Three, and we have one.
Just turn around, chair spin on it.
Oh, yeah, I'll be really rude.
Our friend Philip Robertson, who is the curator at the Wood Gallery, found and provided these for us, and I'm really pleased to see them. And we had a successful, I think, first meeting of the City Hall Art Committee, and look forward to more of those. That was a lot of fun. Otherwise, all I have is tomorrow morning, 8:30 to 9:30 at Baguitos. I look forward to talking with anyone who shows up.
Great. Connor?
Not much. I attended my first community advisory board meeting with the Community Justice Center. It was held in Northfield, and it was, I think it was really positive to see other towns sort of following the lead of Montpelier. And I give particular credit to Chief Fakos, who, you know, you can see he's really like leading by example, and he's sort of a cop's cop, and the other departments were sort of looking at him saying, okay, you know, sort of this reparative way of going about it is the way to go, you know. You could see him changing people's minds. Jamie was also there, I think representing the city manager, and was tremendously articulate, just sharing some, you know, experiences she's had. And, you know, I was glad to be on the board and just very proud of the work Montpelier is doing with our Community Justice Center. Otherwise, I sent it to Bill and Sue, but I've got a draft of that responsible contracting ordinance, and I'll shoot that to the rest of the council the next day or so. That's it for me. Thanks.
Anything on e-scooters?
Yeah. To be honest, on the scooters, really paying close attention to what Burlington is doing, because it may somewhat limit our options as far as inventory, depending on what direction they go in. You know, one thing, and the mayor and I have been on a couple of conference calls with some companies there.
Nobody wants us.
Well, no, it's like what's really appealing is the idea of getting like maybe some electric bikes in town as well, and some companies offer that. But it's really a matter of scale. Like one company said, you know, you need 250 electric bikes, and if 100 scooters freak people out, you know, hold on to your hat. So I don't think we're ready to like commit to that. But if like Burlington's doing some stuff, we can absolutely partner with them. So I'm in sort of wait and see mode before taking the next step. But we do have those survey results, and we'll try to put together a comprehensive. Sue and I just met on this today a bit, so we'll try to put together a good presentation for everybody soon. I know you love scooters, though.
Well, people keep asking me, and one is, I still think we need to sit down and do an evaluation of what happened and how we would view it and maybe how we would approach it. But I didn't put you on the spot on purpose. I really wanted to know the information. I need to talk about two things in the parks. The Parks Commission meant, and they did an experiment this last year. They are working with Mamba, a Montpelier.
Area Mountain Bike Association.
Yeah, Mountain Bike, thank you, anyway, association. They have received a $50,000 federal grant, and they are going to be able to complete the mountain bike trails in the North Branch. And they went through last year experience both for walkers, skiers, bikers, and it was really amazing, very, very positive. There were some incidences where bikers got off trail, but they're working together, and by and large, it was really deemed a success. They did realize that some of the features they put into a bike trail doesn't quite work for walkers, like certain embankment of curves and tables to jump off. So, but they're working on bypasses. So it was really great hearing people work together, the walkers, the bikers, and the Park Commission. And likewise, this last winter, they did a flat tar, and that's my Ohio eye, sorry. You know, the wheel on the bike, tar, yeah. And so it went really well, but also found out that they had a problem with signage. So a lot more signs, but they also need more maps, because summer maps do not apply to the trails that happen in the winter. So just a lot of positive development, and this is also leaning into the Parks Commission is moving forward and working with the Justice Center to do some facilitation on working on their mission and goals within the commission, and then moving out to all their stakeholders sometime in the next year. So very positive news.
Thank you. Lauren, you good?
Great. I just wanted to share the Social and Economic Justice Advisory Committee is doing strategic planning that is looking ahead to the year and trying to map out some real to-dos and action items for the coming year. So if anyone is interested in like looking at that and having any input on what that is going to look like, this is kind of the point of making some decisions over the next couple of weeks. So I'm happy to share if anyone's interested in there's a big matrix, and I'm happy to just send it around, and anyone who has time to look at that would love input to see, is this in line with what the council actually wants that group to be spending their time on? Okay, I'll send it to everyone, because it would be great to make sure that it's on track with what everyone's hoping to see. And then I just have a confession that the Solid Waste Management District, I haven't been able to get to a meeting yet because of family conflicts, but I'm very excited for the next meeting. I can make it. So look forward to reporting back from that. And Ellen's there, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Family scheduling conflicts. again.
Yes, family scheduling conflicts.
Pass.
Largely pass, although I am very excited to see of some of the plans. I've been walking around a lot lately because some of the roads are just a little rough. And the need for better lighting in certain areas where there are crosswalks is painfully apparent. I don't often walk because I'm usually not in town at light hours, but so I'm excited to see that. And that's it.
So I just want to let you all know that I was finally able to get the trash recycling compost group together, and we didn't have a quorum, so we didn't take any official actions. But we discussed the possibility of putting out an RFP to ask someone to do a study for us as to what it would even take to have citywide municipal trash recycling and or compost. And so one of our members volunteered to start a draft of an RFP to get basically a scoping study for that. So more to come on that, but I just wanted to give you that update. Question?
Solid Waste District should be able to help you.
Yeah. Yep. Well, so they may help pay for the scoping study.
Okay. 'Cause
Yeah.
At one point, they did some composting pickups, so I just thought they.
Yep. And Ellen's all over that.
Okay.
Yeah, it was great. So, and that is it for me. Okay.
Just note that we have our strategic planning next week, Monday and Tuesday. You should have all got something forwarded from me, from Julia Novak. To be clear, you don't need to actually have filled out all of that, but she did want you to have thought about those questions in advance, to be prepared to discuss that. You don't have to do homework. One of you asked that question, and I did clarify that.
It might have been the teacher.
It might have been the teacher who didn't want to do homework, right? It's possible. And otherwise, we are meeting tomorrow morning with the group, the appellant group, about the parking garage, and so we'll be talking about that shortly.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we're just about ready to go, move on to the next item. If we're going to go into an executive session, I think this is one of these things that requires two motions.
I move that the council find that premature general knowledge of the status of negotiations regarding the parking garage will place the city at a substantial disadvantage by disclosing the state of negotiations and the city's position in those negotiations.
I'll second.
Further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes. And then, so to go into executive session.
I move we go into executive session to discuss the negotiations regarding the parking garage under Title I VSA, Section 313, A1 something.
Yeah, you got it.
See how John writes that out.
Something.
I was ready.
There needs to be a second.
A1 is fine.
Is there a second?
You always do it right.
Second.
Okay. Further discussion. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, motion carries. All right, and we will not be returning, to take any official actions.
Right.
Right.
There you go.
That's the one. Okay. Phew. Instead of damning us to eternal.